We are all running late. Request everyone to kindly be seated. I hope everybody had their lunch. Please get in. Request NIUA volunteers to kindly assist everybody inside, please. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. We'll start with our next section. Moving on further, we have a launch of ArcGIS story map for complete guidance of disabled-friendly cities. It is a distinct endeavor by the BASIIC program of NIUA, Varanasi Smart City Limited, and Environmental System Research Institute that showcases the inclusive effort taken by city to make Varanasi more accessible. These efforts depicted in the form of a storytelling, interactive map, and dynamic data. For the launch of this story map and to put more light on the thoughts behind developing it, I would like to request Dr. D. Vasudevan, the Chief General Manager from Varanasi Smart City, Mr. Sharath Sharma from ESRI, and Ms. Veronica, Learning and Communication Associate from NIU, to join us on the dais, please. Veronica. Ms. Veronica from NIUA, please come over the dais, please. Thank you. And we'll start with the next session.
Hello. Check. I hope all of you had a very hearty lunch, and I just hope you don't doze off in the post-lunch session. For the launch of the history story map, I would like to request Dr. Vasudevan sir, Chief General Manager of Varanasi Smart City Limited, to speak a little bit about what the story map and the Kashi Geo Hub is about. Yeah, over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, NIUA, for this opportunity. And it's difficult to grab the attention of people immediately post lunch, and we'll try to do that. I would like to, I think everybody knows about Varanasi. I don't need to bore you with the introduction of what Varanasi is. And VSCL stands for Varanasi Smart City Limited, one of the 100 smart cities selected by the Smart City Mission, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. And GIS is a technology which you are all aware of, very useful. Cutting across all technologies is quite useful to integrate everything on a GIS platform. So as part of our smart city technology mandate, we have implemented the GIS. Now we have implemented it very well, and we have really putting it into good use. And many of the cities, when I do a peer review, and still a long way to go, but we have done it way ahead, even when our smart city mission started, because we had an advantage of getting the entire city map through GIS through another Japanese aided program called Institutional Development Program. So we had the base map completely ready the day one. So that was a big advantage and a leap forward for us. So we went on implementing all the smart solutions and getting them integrated on the top of the GIS maps. That has got us very good advantage. Everything we could do location-wise, spatially. So that was one of the success behind our GIS implementation. In fact, we won the best GIS implementation award also from GSRA India in Varanasi. So we thought, having done that, we should do something different, something more. There's no point of doing what everybody is mandated to do. So what can we do? So one problem which I identified is people were not sharing the GIS data with others. I have seen generally, even during my entire career, when people go and say, sir, you're done GIS, can you share the RGIS data or the shape files? People say, nahi, file permission pushna padega, aap udhar apply kariye, and nobody shares the GIS data. This is across the board, all municipal corporations, all governments, all departments. I have myself gone through this process through my entire long career. People don't share the special data. What they don't understand is, if we do not share the data, they will try to create their own. One, waste of money, duplicity. We are wasting the government exchequer, number one. Number two, the data may not be of same standard. Sooner or later, you need to integrate, put them all together to work for the city, work for the people. It will not work. There will be a lot of mismatch. You will be troubleshooting, fighting over that. So government has very correctly implemented what is called a open data policy. There is an open data portal of Government of India. It is a very innovative and revolutionary step taken by the government. And there is a geospatial policy also, which says the data should be shared among them. We thought we will be a different entity. In Varanasi Smart City, anybody and everybody who was approached us, whether it is a Varanasi Development Authority, Varanasi PWD, State PWD, Varanasi Municipal Corporation, or even the research scholar, IIT BHU, we have shared the GIS data and we have helped them so that we have a common, uniform, standard architecture and the database so that the city stands to benefit. So we wanted to build again another step forward. Why don't I make this geospatial data available on an open data platform? So we have created what is called a Kashi Geo Hub. One of its kind in India, no other smart city has done. It is an open geospatial data portal. You could note down the URL because we won't be able to show it live because it's quite heavy, need a good internet connection. But we are going to show a small video how it works. So we have opened up the geospatial data portal. It was inaugurated by Durga Shankar Mr. Saab, the former secretary, now Mawa, and now the Chief Secretary, Government of Uttar Pradesh. None other than him, he inaugurated it. And we have conducted a lot of hackathon on the top of that. And a lot of new developers, startups, and scholars, research scholars are using that data portal and making use of that to develop applications on the top of that. We also find a sustainable revenue earning mechanism through the GeoHub portal. Certain data which is sensitive, we can always skip it on application and for a small fee. Most of the data which is not user sensitive or citizen sensitive, it's not a privacy, it's not breaching any privacy data, we made it open public. So you will be able to see that. So then when this program of National Institute of Urban Affairs, the BASIC program was going on, we already have a good partnership with ESRI India. They have been helping us. In fact, Kashi GeoHub would not have been a possibility without the active support and help from the ESRI India. They did a tremendous out of a technical support to our team, GIS team, to implement this. So this idea came, we were implementing this BASIC program, and why don't we make this a part of the GeoHub? Because storytelling is a wonderful way of teaching people and educating and bringing awareness. People say a picture speaks 1,000 words. In today's world, I would say a video speaks million words. A video small, YouTube is so successful because of this. It conveys in a very short period of time, teaches you so many things. So why don't we integrate very nice video-based, data-based, and picture-based with a lot of charts and this thing? Why can't we propagate this idea of inclusiveness as a part of the GeoHub? So this is a joint effort initiated by NIUA BASIC program. ESRI supported in terms of technology, so we implemented. So there it goes, ladies and gentlemen. You will be able to see a small video and a small presentation how we did this. And this is one step again in the direction of bringing accessibility and inclusion to the India. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vasudevan. No other person could have better explained what the importance of open data and what Kashi GeoHub is about. Now I request Mr. Sharat from ISRI to come give his presentation.
Good afternoon, all of you. I'm representing ISRI India Technologies Limited. ISRI stands for Environmental System of Research Institute. So we are the world leader in GIS technology. ISRI builds the most powerful geospatial mapping and the analytical products in the world. Our company founded in 1969, and since then we are serving our customers in implementing the GIS-based solutions. So I don't know why it's not moving the next slide. Can you check? Oh yeah, great. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we do have 100 offices around the world and professionals from 67 countries who are continuously contributing in the development and the enhancement of the GIS platform so that we can build a better decision support system. If we talk about our values, so we are innovative, we are user-centric, and we are research-driven. So today, ISRI GIS platform is being utilized by more than 3.5 lakh customers worldwide, including all the major cities and the national and state level government organizations. And we are completely committed to support our customers, by providing them flexibility and more choices which they didn't have earlier. And the most important point which I would like to say that we spend 30% of our revenue back in the research and development program so that we can provide the latest up-to-date technology to our customers. So ISRI GIS platform is already being utilized by NIUA as well as Varanasi Smart City. And ArcGIS Story Map is nothing but one of the application of this platform. So I would say it's nothing but a web-based application for story authoring. And basically all the content which is there, which we collected from the NIUA and the project information which we got from the Varanasi Smart City. So we have created this story map. This actually comprises of interactive maps and various dashboards, statistics, descriptive information, text to tell the story about the initiatives and the projects. And these kind of story maps can easily be published on the web so that anybody can access it from anywhere and on any device. So NIUA, Varanasi Smart City and ISRI, we come together, we build this story map for BASIC, and we are the technology partner for NIUA. So our common objective is to spread the knowledge of GIS throughout the nation. And we are providing and supporting the, both the organization with the tools and technology so that they can use it for their research and development programs and for the initiative. BASIC is one of those initiatives, which is being developed using the ArcGIS story map technology. So I would like to thank NIUA team and the Varanasi Smart City team who gave us chance to work along with them and publishing this beautiful story map of BASIC, which showcase all the contents, policy guidelines, and the ongoing and the various other completed projects of the Varanasi Smart City. So just to reiterate, this story map is accessible through the Kashi Geo Hub. And you just need to type in the Kashi Geo Hub in your internet browser and you can access all the information which is available there in the site, in the BASIC story map. Thank you. Now I would request Veronica to speak a little bit on the BASIC and launch the video. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharad. Just to recap what the Dr. Vasudevan had said, I mean, storytelling is an important component of building a narrative, especially when we're discussing human-centric and humanitarian issues that need more context, evidence, and empathy. This endeavor of the story map preparation is a reflection of the state of inclusion in Varanasi city and the kind of effort that the city authorities, VSCL in particular, has put in bringing such transformative change to one of the most oldest city in the world. It is the enthusiasm of VSCL and the willingness of ISRI to translate the journey taken so far to a tangible outcome. Thanks, Dr. Vasudevan and Dr. Ruma, who's not here with us, and her colleague Sharad, because of your encouragement, immense support, and constant hard work that we could come up with this story map. And of course, my ex-colleague Prabha, who started this initiative. Our collaboration with VSCL in the past 2 years has been very fruitful, and we have managed to achieve quite a few number of tangible outcomes. But the intangible impact of our collaboration cannot be measured. We're proud to say that this collaboration has brought universal access and inclusion at the forefront of the development agenda of the city. But the story map captures the engagement of various endeavors of BASIC program in the city of Varanasi. We also had the privilege of engaging with the entire city ecosystem, right from collaborating with beneficiaries to decision makers and implementers. Disability and being inclusive towards their needs have been one of them, which is where our initial thoughts were seeded in the development of the story map. In fact, part of why we designed the story map was the need felt to sort of engage with stakeholders for whom so many inclusive interventions have been made. The story map aims to bridge the gap between implementers and its beneficiaries. This endeavor tells stories of success, aspirations, and facilitates the visualization of the possible direction to achieve inclusion. Through this, we envision to tell stories of persons with disabilities, their life, needs, experiences, and cities' commitment in turning those into a reality. The story map provides interactive and dynamic data dashboards on disability to ensure evidence-based decision-making. It takes us through the efforts that the city has taken in the past few years to be Sugamya. This includes infrastructure efforts such as Rudraksh Convention Center, Machodri School, and others that have great accessibility features built in. I would not take much time because this effort is marking the beginning of something special. We hope that this story map becomes enriched with more success stories, interaction with stakeholders, and captures the true essence of inclusion, that is accessible built environment, inclusive policy landscape, participation and representation of all marginalized groups in the process of urban development. I would request that, the team to put on the video that we had prepared, the launch video.
Building Accessible, Safe and Inclusive Indian Cities program of NIUA, in collaboration with Varanasi Smart City and ISRI, launches the ArcGIS Story Map for complete guidance of disabled-friendly cities. The story map is available on the Kashi GeoHub portal, which is a public platform designed by VSCL. The story map showcases and captures the inclusive efforts taken by the Varanasi city and India at large for the inclusion of persons with disabilities, such as the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, Smart Cities Mission, and Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan. It includes dynamic and interactive data related to disability and also documents the disability inclusive projects implemented across the city, such as the Machodri Smart School with its accessible and disabled-friendly classrooms and infrastructure. Dr. Sampurnanand Stadium, which has an integrated sports infrastructure, Rudraksh International Corporation and Convention Center with its latest and cutting-edge technology, barrier-free design and facilities which can be taken as examples of how city infrastructure can be made more accessible. Other projects in the city, such as landscaping of the Benia Bagh Park and street redevelopment project. The story map includes the learnings from the co-design workshop organized in collaboration with the Global Disability Innovation Hub, Kiran Society, and Varanasi Smart City. Some of the key learnings are using social media and news channels to conduct awareness and sensitization campaigns and provide more access to key heritage sites with additional support or assistance for people with disabilities. The platform also provides key sectoral recommendations that cities can adopt to support or assist persons with disabilities to live a quality life. To view the full story map, head to www.kashigeohub.org.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vasudevan. The Chief General Manager from Varanasi Smart City, Mr. Sharat Sharma from ESRI, and my colleague from NIUA, Veronica, for really explaining about the ArcGIS story mapping, which will help the state of Varanasi to work towards inclusivity. With this, we come to the end of this session. We start the next panel discussion, that is Gender and Disability Inclusion in Urban Development, a policy initiative. This rightly reminds me of the quote by Kofi Annan, a Ghanaian diplomat who served as a Secretary General of UN Nations as well. He had said, "Gender equality is more than a goal in itself. It is a precondition for meeting the challenge of reducing poverty, promoting sustainable development, and building good governance." Our next session takes precedence from this quote. It aims to identify the gaps and challenges that exist with regard to our policies, legal and regulatory framework related to gender and disability, the gap between these policy and frameworks, and the execution and practice for providing policy recommendations for the same. The panelists will also share their insights and experience of participatory and inclusive design processes to help us to identify priority areas for policy intervention in urban planning fields such as housing, public transport and mobility infrastructure by incorporating gender and disability inclusion into urban planning and design at national, regional, and local levels. This session will be moderated by Mr. Ajay Suri, who's the head of NIUA's Inclusive City Center. And we'll begin with a presentation by Ms. Sneha Vishaka from Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, which is an independent think tank doing legal research on issues related to urban development and municipal governance, with Sneha's work focusing on making cities safer, accessible, and more equitable for women and other vulnerable groups within the city. I would now request Mr. Ajay Suri and Ms. Sneha Vishaka to kindly take their places on the stage, please. Well, continuing the string of introduction, it is a pleasure to invite the following panelists to join us on the dais as well. Ms. Riti Mandal, she's the Senior Program Manager at Safety Pin, who uses technology and data to look at how gender and the built environment intersect in creating inequalities in public spaces. Next in line is Ms. Nidhi Goyal, Founder and Executive Director of Rising Flame, who has been working on disability rights and gender justice for a decade now. Her work spans research, writing, training, campaigns, advocacy, and art. I would like to also invite Ms. Madhuri Das, a gender program specialist at UNICEF ICO. She has over 16 years of experience in program management and technical expertise in the area of women empowerment, gender equality, gender-based violence, including violence against women and girls, adolescent empowerment, family planning, and working with women collectives. We also have Professor Subrata Chattopadhyay, who is a professor and the head of Department of Architecture and Regional Planning at IIT Kharagpur, with over 33 years of experience in teaching and research that hugely focuses on regional planning. Last but not the least, Ms. Mukta Nayak is an architect and an urban planner, currently a fellow at the Center for Policy Research. Her work at CPR focuses on understanding the links between internal migration and urbanization in the Indian context. Her interests lie in exploring the topics of internal migration, housing, urban informality, and gender inclusion. With all panelists present here on the dais, I would now request Ms. Sneha Vishaka to set the second panel in motion with her presentation. Over to you, Vishaka. Sure, Ajay, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion number 2, post-lunch, a difficult time for all of us. But a very interesting topic where we are looking at gender and disability inclusion in urban development. And you can imagine the complexities in the city, whereby the city managers are struggling to meet the overall demand for services in the city, and we add to the complexity and we are trying to sensitize them to be more inclusive, particularly to the requirements of the persons with disability and the women. Well, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted several inadequacies in urban infrastructure and services in fulfilling the needs of the growing urban population in India, specifically the needs of those in vulnerable situation, women and girls, children, persons with disabilities, and the elderly. All of us would recall the phenomena of reverse migration that took the attention of the entire globe, and this was in 2021. And this did demonstrate, or this did highlight, the housing and economic vulnerabilities of the marginalized communities. The fast urbanizing cities in India will face even greater level of stress on the already overburdened urban infrastructure. The situation is worse for vulnerable and marginalized population groups, as they are excluded from participating and contributing to the society due to the non-inclusive urban planning and design. The spatial exclusion also contributes to exclusion from social, economic, political, and civic spheres. This was adequately highlighted by the dignitaries in the opening session as well. There is the global commitment to advance gender equality and universal accessibility and inclusion of persons with disabilities in urban services and built form under the new urban agenda and the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, especially the SDG 11 for cities. These have highlighted a clear and urgent need for emphasis and promotion of accessible and inclusive habitat as the right path for achieving sustainable development. Cities, unfortunately, continue to be built neglecting the needs, interests, and routines of persons with disabilities, women and girls, and other non-binary identities. Poor urban design and management of public spaces, particularly in areas such as access, mobility, safety, health and hygiene, climate resilience, and security of tenure, along with the weak disaggregated data, leads to unsafe neighborhoods and inaccessible urban spaces. And let me be the elephant in the room, full of urban planners as well, and say this. More than often, urban planners and practitioners lack awareness and sensitization on the importance of prioritizing gender needs and persons with disabilities in the urban design process, and/or they do not have the required knowledge and training for on-ground implementation, and/or there is no legal mandate to effectively implement gender and disability inclusive strategies. Therefore, technical support and guidance is important to support the mainstreaming of gender and disability inclusion in the implementation of SDGs, particularly SDG 11, to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Further, to fully incorporate inclusivity in the city framework, it is critical that participatory and inclusive design processes explore the experiences and uses of the city from the perspective of persons with disability, women and girls, and other non-binary identities. The objective of this session is to understand the policy gaps and challenges in legal and regulatory frameworks in line with India's international commitments and the vision for India Act 2047. The deliberation amongst the diverse stakeholders here will help to share insights and experiences of participatory and inclusive design processes and help identify priority areas for policy intervention in urban planning fields. It will also help identify policy actions to close the gap between policy and practice. Intention and action for incorporating gender sensitive and disability inclusive urban planning and design at national, regional, and local levels. This session is for 60 minutes, right, Ilaji? So we started around 2:35. We should be concluding by 3:35. And this is what I propose, the way we utilize this time. We would have a presentation by Sneha Visakha, and this would be for 10 minutes, please. We have a timekeeper here. My colleague Ray is here. Please take note of the timesheets as she displays. Followed by the presentation by Visakha, we would have another presentation by Madhuri. And then we have the 4 panelists as well. And I would request you to respond to the directed questions posed by me. Madhuri, if you could restrict your presentation to 6 minutes exactly, please take note, Ray. And then 6 minutes each for the panelists. And if all of us are disciplined in time management, we would have at least 10 to 15 minutes to address the questions raised by the audience who have been by the participants who have been very patiently listening to the discourse since the morning. And I think it would be in the fitness of things that we also give them the opportunity to raise issues with the panelists here. Thank you very much, and request again to adhere to the time limits. May I now request Visakha for her presentation.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Mr. Suri. And thank you so much to NIUA and the UN India's office for giving me this opportunity to talk about my work. Though I was prepared for a 15-minute presentation, I'm going to do my best to restrict it to 10 minutes. So I just wanted to set out a brief introduction to the context of the conversation that we're going to have in this panel on gender and disability inclusion. Now, I'm a lawyer and I'm going to speak from a legal perspective as well as a political perspective, because the right to the city is not a guaranteed fundamental right, but it has always been articulated as a moral right and a vehicle for social inclusion. Now, the realization of such a moral right requires concerted efforts at a variety of areas and thematic, interventions, which means that this is not just a question of lawyers making or helping pass a law, but it requires the coming together of practitioners, civil society, political and citizen participation, as well as technical interventions. Now, in setting off this conversation, what I wanted to focus on is what social theorists, feminist geographers, and disability theorists have repeatedly pointed out, that space, including urban space, is not neutral. It is subject to the operation of power relations that is involved in molding that space, which basically means that if we live in an unequal society, we live in unequal cities. So changing the city requires transforming social relations within that city. And this is where interventions in the built and the socio-political and economic structures of the city can have an impact on changing the social relationships of the city. Now, the reason in this presentation I'm going to make a case for a feminist and disability perspective is because a political problem where there is a problem of vulnerable populations in the cities not being taken into account in dominant planning processes requires a political solution for the same. Now, the realization of a city, as I pointed out, it's not enough that there is a central law, such as the right to, the Persons with Disabilities Act. You have the Constitution of India that confers fundamental rights to every citizen of freedom, of a right to living, of movement. But the realization of these rights hinges on the material provision of infrastructure. And this is why the focus of attention should not just be at the national level, but in fact at the most local context. So this is very important for us to keep in mind, that implementation of this law rests in the hands of the state governments and particularly the city governments. Now, it is the neighborhoods where these decisions have to be taken place, and I'm going to cover a few issues with the legal frameworks that prevents this from happening. Now, the problem is that lack of adequate sanitation infrastructure, for instance, prevents women from entering the workforce in a very direct way. I've often wondered why I never really saw too many women taxi drivers, and the reason is because transport sector is a mobile profession. So being able to enter into this profession requires a robust sanitation infrastructure across the city. This is why women cannot leave their particular neighborhoods for a variety of reasons. Now, I'm just going to look at the thematic areas of gender and disability inclusions and take you through the legal and policy frameworks at the international, national, and the local levels that requires our attention. Now, I'd like to quote from the harmonized guidelines that were recently published in 2021, which basically means that
the needs of persons with disabilities, elderly, women, children, gender and sexual minorities have to be considered at all levels of planning and design, particularly to the point of even procurement and implementation processes, something that is missing in the current context. Now, the international framework is through FCDO, UNCRPD, SDG goals, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, New Urban Agenda. I'm not going to go through this because it has been well established by the previous speakers. But what I will come to is at the implementation level of the existing frameworks. Now, there is the right of persons with disabilities act at the central level for accessibility and a framework that guarantees or requires compliance with the standards that are mentioned under the laws for RPDA. However, there is no such framework that exists for gender inclusion, which makes it a very difficult area to take into account, which basically now means that under the national framework, there are some guidelines that dictate the design of urban space. One is the URDF, the Urban and Regional Development Plans, Formulation and Implementation Guidelines, which touch upon disability inclusion as well as gender sensitive design. However, this is not enough and only addresses a very superficial design context of the problem. Second, with respect to the built environment, we have rules that sort of create technical standards for compliance with access. Third, transportation and mobility have a series of frameworks that are applicable at the national level, but fundamentally implementable at the local level in urban, centers across the country. Now, these have specific rules and regulations also that have to be analyzed. Furthermore, we cannot have this conversation of access to the city without talking about digital access. As everybody knows, in the pandemic in particular, predominant reliance on digital access, digital apps has made it for everything, for groceries, for healthcare services, you name it, and we have an app today. Now, when these apps are not compliant with access standards, it completely renders persons with disabilities, particularly women with disabilities in the city, extremely vulnerable, unable to access very basic services that they need in the city. Now, I just wanted to quickly touch upon and explain why a standardized solution such as issuing of standards will not be enough when it comes to gender inclusion in cities. We need to understand that the way in which people use the city has a high dependence on their social location, which basically means that a woman who has gendered social roles in our society, where she's predominantly tasked with domestic responsibilities, care responsibilities, will have a different way of using the city than, say, a man who is expected to go to, work and have a 9-to-5 job. Now, these are extreme generalizations, but broadly, what we see is an absence of a gender perspective in planning. I do not intend to say that planners are not thinking about, particularly want to exclude women from these conversations, but it just basically means that when we don't take into account the complexity of social relationships and the activities that take place in the city, it results in cities that are extremely exclusionary to half the population of the city. Now, trip chaining is something that basically identifies that somebody who may have to drop off their child for childcare might have to pick up groceries on the way, go to work, maybe a domestic worker who's working in multiple houses in a particular neighborhood will not have the same kind of mobility patterns as an industrial worker. So this requires that emphasis be laid on local context and everyday life and needs of women and girls in our cities. Now, we have to have a conversation about women with disabilities in particular, because often what happens in gender inclusion conversations is that we are not talking about women with disabilities. When we're talking about disability, we're not taking into account the gendered ways in which women with disabilities are affected. Now, this is why an intersectional approach in understanding needs and uses and centering women's experiences, not just from one particular class or caste background, but taking into account the needs of women in poverty, indigenous women, women who might be sexual minorities, women who are migrant workers, women who might be domestic workers, elderly women, women who live alone. So there is a variety of groups that may have very differing needs and views that need to be taken into account. Now, safety is almost predominantly the fulcrum of access to the city. Safety, so far what we often see, and everybody understands that women's safety is a huge conversation in our country. And even though when the way that we deal with safety is often through carcerality and criminal processes, there is not enough attention being given to the ways in which cities can be built in order to incorporate not only safety for women, but autonomy for women. Therefore, it's a social and political concern that needs to be taken into account when cities are being planned. Now, my first statistic is a very, disheartening statistic. The home is actually the most likely place for a woman to be killed, which basically means that public space design needs to take into account how private spaces are for women. In our country, the sad fact is that according to the National Family Health Surveys, women cannot leave their homes without taking permission from a husband or an authority figure in the family. Now, this is a statistic that cuts across every kind of background. Women from different classes, caste, religious, and ethnic categories all are expected to take permissions. This is the majority of women in our country. Furthermore, domestic violence is so rampant and has a social sanction. In the recent National Family Health Surveys, over 70 to 80% of women in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana said that their husband is well within his rights to beat them if they deviated from their social roles. Now, what this requires is that urban planners need to be sensitized to the lived realities of women. Now, this basically means that listening to their stories, understanding their experiences, and more importantly, involving them in the planning of the city. Now, I'll just go through a few key issues for consideration, which basically the main problem is the lack of imagination in understanding accessibility and gender inclusion. There is a diversity here that is startling. There are a range of disabilities, which includes physical disabilities, perceptible disabilities, but also invisible disabilities, including psychosocial disabilities, which basically means that in our understanding of what access means, we have to change and actually take into account, if I can just have a couple of more minutes, I'll just wrap up. Yeah, okay, all right. So what we need to do is ensure that there is participatory planning in this context, because cultural factors, social factors, economic factors, they're so different at different parts of the country, which means that the solutions for gender and disability inclusions are common. One, we need participatory planning frameworks. Two, we need representation of women, girls, and persons with disabilities in particular is critical and cannot be substituted by anything else. This is the direct implementation of, leaving no one behind as the SDG goals articulate, as well as ensuring that communities in India are empowered to autonomously plan and organize their own neighborhoods, which requires democratization of planning functions. Currently, municipal corporations or development authorities do planning of cities rather than ward committees, which should be empowered financially with functions and adequate training and capacity building to undertake planning of their own neighborhoods. Finally, I just wanted to add that incorporating universal design as a design criteria from the inception of all stages of urban planning and infrastructure, implementing accessibility norms, and ensuring that disaggregated data is collected, feminist and disability planning tools are incorporated in the planning processes, and finally, capacity building, training, and sensitization at all levels of governance has to be done. Now, all of these can be done through changes in law, which makes legal intervention one of the most important areas of intervention, and there has to be a concerted push to democratize planning functions in our cities. So with that, I will wrap up my presentation. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks. Thanks, Visakha. I think you have set the tone for the discussions today or for this session. Very appropriately, you have explained the legal and regulatory framework for inclusive cities, contributing factors and challenges, and also provided a quick guide as to how cities could achieve inclusion as well. Just to add another layer to the discussions, I recall, on another global platform a few years back, I was working on a program in partnership with UK DFID, which was called Equitable Economic Growth in Cities. And the whole hypothesis was that you need to promote equitable access to public goods and services, including public spaces, to promote equitable economic growth. So it's not just, we are not pitching for inclusive cities to just improve the quality of life of the marginalized segments. We are also saying that this would help to mainstream them into the economic spheres of the city as well. Thank you very much once again, Vishakha. Now, may I request Madhuri for a presentation in 6 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to NIUA for giving this opportunity to me. I'm representing UNICEF here. I work as a gender specialist. I also would kind of beg excuse for the fact that I'm not a disability specialist. I'm not an urban planner. I'll come only from purely my gender experience on in the space. And incidentally, I think Vishakha has covered a lot of my grounds, but I think I'll still kind of take colleagues through a couple of slides which I feel may add to what Vishakha just presented. I'll just move. So UNICEF actually has been in the child rights space for many, many years, but 2017 onwards, UNICEF has started to really look at gender, mainstreaming, and now moving into our country program cycle the next year, we're actually looking at how we are making it more gender transformative in all our discourses, in all our spaces, in all our outcome areas. And so disability has come in as a big focus for our programs, from the next country cycle. And, in the current times, we are working very closely with the RC and the other UN agencies on really bringing in the disability discourse to a lot of our, programs and schemes. And I work with the RC, colleagues very closely on that. How do we actually frame this issue? I think Vishakha has really, pinned it really straight there, is to understand how marginalization actually affects each of us as women and girls. So when we look at marginalization, especially for the disability, section, we understand that it results in their exclusions across the domains, economic, social, community lives, their spaces. This first slide, I think I wanted to really draw, everyone's attention is, I think Ajayji just mentioned that, when you talk about, this is a very favorite slide of mine, I don't know why I wanted to share it with you, is that when we say we're really opening up as equal opportunities and equal employers, do we really make space for women and girls in that space, and for children? We make it very carved out for men, there. And I'm not saying that this gender discussion is around men and women. It's, we're just trying to say that, there's more recognition that needs to go into, looking at women and girls in the whole disability space. So there's a nice quote, when planners fail to account for gender, public spaces become male spaces by default. So I think that's what pretty much was said in my in the previous presentation by my colleague there. So this is a picture that I think nothing to not pinning it down to any particular space, but this is a Central Square ramp in Chennai, April 2022. It really gives you a glimpse of how some of the standards to urban planning and implementation have really been taken all over. It's been tossed up in the air. This is a space you can see, and there's nothing which is telling us that it's sensitive to disable friendly people. What happens when mobility is restricted? I think this is just a kind of a picture to tell you that it's almost like a cross mark everywhere. You see, it's education section, you talk about health, you talk about the bus stops, talk about access to any shops, you name it. And, it's very difficult for them to kind of, so far, urbanization actually, we feel in this space from the gender and equity and from the disability space, we really feel that they've not been really taking consideration of, persons with disabilities. There are some very good smart city, concepts that Sir just alluded to. And I think there's a lot of work that's happening in a couple of other states. I was in MP last week and I saw some real 3 smart city concepts and very, very friendly, I think. And a lot of learnings can come from those spaces as well. So some of the barriers, I think, again, covered by Vishakha, but very quickly, how do we look at access to reproductive health care and basic care services, violence and access to justice, just like Vishakha mentioned that, within the home spaces are the most dangerous of spaces, and how do we really look at getting our planning and designing there. Education, we know that girls are really thrown out of schools, if they're, from the disability segments. Environment, I think a lot of work around environment and climate change and all around that needs to be done when it comes to women and disability, employment, and intersectionality. I think when you are doubly, triply marginalized, I think there's more focus on how we really get them into planning and designing of programming is something that we really need to talk about. Intersectional factors further marginalizes persons with disability, especially women and children. I really don't want to take you there, but I thought, lack of child-centered approaches, lack of women and girl intentional designs needs to be coming into our programming whenever we're talking about lack of data. I think Sir already spoke in the sense that, if there's data, people don't want to share data. So how do we look at really, and data within data? We can't really look at everyone as a homogeneous category. How do we really look at, filters there? And how do we want to really break them down further? These are a few things I felt it's important for us to kind of, maybe plan better or strategize better, looking at how, norms, policies, and programs, what can we look at, in terms of intersectionalities, building synergies, look at data and evidence, knowledge creation and sharing, what is happening good somewhere, and how do we really take those processes to other states? Not that, we just have to replicate, we have to be really mindful of the context and things like that. Accessible and inclusive innovation and technology. I think we just heard from Sharad here. The strategic partnerships, government policies and frameworks, private sector engagement, a huge space there for private sectors to come in. UN agencies and intergovernmental processes really play a big role. And I also personally, have had this opportunity of working across states, and I see there's very little representation of OPDs. Really less of representations there. The last point was about inclusive management. It's about planning, designing, bringing inclusion, diversity into our scheme of things. How do we make programs and universal designs more accessible to persons? And basically talking about these are a few recommendations, but I think most of them are actually covered by Vishaka, but I've already got the 0 minute space. Some very quickly, half a minute. Some examples that we're doing in UNICEF is basically, we're working around policies and women's policies and child rights policies. We're really focusing in most of our states, and particularly in states like Maharashtra and, bigger states, which have a real say in terms of, policy making and decisions there, is to have dedicated chapters on, disability and special focus on women and girls. In Gujarat, we're actually looking at how public goods and services can be made, gender and child rights friendly. Disability mapping in a lot of childcare institutions where we've seen 50% of the children out there are actually disabled, and there's no plan and no strategy around how they can be made, integrated into the scheme of things. And I think we're doing in a couple of states, we're really working on providing girls, improving access of girls to unique disability identity cards. And a lot of focus for our country program currently is to actually build on evidence, and then kind of take those evidences into the next country program, which we start from the next year. I'll just close here, and thank you so much for this opportunity. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Madhuri. Well, the message is loud and clear. Marginalization results in exclusion. And thanks for building on and further elaborating on the issues covered by Vishaka in a presentation. And, you very appropriately captured the barrier space by persons with disabilities and the women. We get into the panel discussions now. My request to each panelist is, please speak slowly, because we have a sign language interpreter as well, and we don't want to challenge them. I'm slightly breaking the sequence of the panelists the way you were introduced. And this is no bias against anyone. This is just to ensure a more interesting sequence of talk. May I first invite Mukta? And my question to you is, what is the impact of inclusive urban policies on the economic and social context of cities in India? Again, a suggestion to all the panelists. We are talking about gender inclusion here. We are not talking about women inclusion. And you might like to also address issues faced by the marginalized gender, the LGBT plus group. Thank you.
Am I audible? Okay. Thank you so much, Ajay. And it's a real privilege to be here today. So thank you to NIUA, the Ministry, FCDO, and UN India for organizing this. I'd like to step back a little bit to sort of just point out on inclusive policy making and how it itself is placed within a loop of demand, response, and feedback. And that's continuously shaping this discourse of policy making. So city level responses are also then responding to actions of claim making and advocacy. Who's making these claims? Are they an important political constituent? How consistent, how evidence-based, how rational, how strategic are these activities of claim making themselves? So there's a process which then creates a set of recognized claims. Now, once these claims are recognized as legitimate by whatever process, then there's a challenge of translating these into policies and then into action and intervention. So I just wanted to lay that out because whenever new ideas come into the space, and it's been very exciting to hear all the new ideas in the session before this, they actually need to be socialized into the policy ecosystem. So inclusion can't be a box to check. And I think all of us sitting here in this room struggle with this a lot, that there's this checkbox of diversity and inclusion. Across the world, this is part of the political discussion, that how do we talk about issues of representation and inclusion without making it into this checkbox business. And so it's not going to work unless politicians, bureaucrats, civil society actors, private sector, social entrepreneurs, all the stakeholders we spoke about in the session before this, actually understand why these changes are being made, because systems are essentially resistant to change. So I just wanted to bring that out there. But once a set of rights is recognized by law or policy changes are articulated through new schemes, and especially when budgets are allocated, there is a binding on governments to act on that. In this cyclical policy making, it's particularly challenging to mainstream the inclusion of vulnerable groups because it's coming through this history of demand making, right? So differently abled, women and other genders, migrants, informal workers, homeless, all of them can't be mainstreamed because it becomes a problem of institution design and how accountability is fixed within our system. I'm pointing this out because without those mainstreamed approaches, it's impossible to respond to the intersectionality that all of us have been talking about. I'll give you an example here. I work with migrants, and especially during the pandemic, when we looked at what migrant households were facing, you looked at how women migrants were particularly hard hit. They were unable to pay rent, or when they ran out of options for credit in the city, because they were responsible for the reproduction of their households in the city. They had to struggle daily to put food on the table. They had to relocate household resources and leverage already very thin social networks to survive. And eventually, when these women migrants had to take the decision to leave the city, they didn't really want to go because they were giving up freedoms that they had in the city and retreating back into an extremely patriarchal rural space. So these sort of issues do not come to light because in the governance system, the nodal body that would be interfacing with migrants may be, like in this case, a labor department, which is not interfacing and talking to a women and child welfare department. So I'm just trying to point out that sometimes we get stuck in rigid institutional designs and schematics that make it impossible for us to really address the issues that we know need to be addressed. And we ourselves, ironically, get trapped into the checkbox sort of system. I'll come to Ajay's question next. How policy actions have a rippling effect on economic and social life. We'll take interventions, something that we've all talked about today, interventions towards safe and affordable transportation for women. This might be well driven by a political consideration where women are recognized as important political constituents. But the impacts on women's ability to generate an income, the social change generated by a high presence of women, just seeing more women in public spaces and the empowerment and the acceptability that causes has a profound effect, not only on women themselves, but on households, families, individuals, young people, and a whole bunch of people, part and parcel of that larger experience. In the fieldwork I did in a small town in Rajasthan, for instance, I found that improved highways and frequent paratransit was actually allowing rural men to come to the city, commute to the city to do industrial work. And what the ripple effect of this was that the women in the village were then entering very public spheres of influence, like going to the panchayat office to do work, or coming to the mandi to sell the produce because the men were not there. It was important for the men to go to the factory every day and earn that wage. And that sort of doubled incomes, or at least, provided a lot more economic mobility than they had previously experienced. So I'm illustrating these because all of these changes, they happen over time, and they also unfold in unexpected and complex ways. So interventions actually need to be made over longer periods of time with a consistent commitment for them to yield anything. And the elephant in the room here is that the urban governance system in India is actually very challenged to deal with this kind of long-term intervention system. A lot of my colleagues on the panel here will talk about infrastructure and spatial infrastructure and design in a spatial and hard infrastructure sense. I just wanted to draw attention here to the fact that urban local bodies and urban governance systems are not very good at delivering some of the basic rights and entitlements related to even things like education, healthcare, basic services that we are sort of entitled to. Urban ICDS, urban public healthcare, urban facilitation for delivery of pensions, etc., well-acknowledged gap areas. And of course, everything is more complicated in an urban space where the demands are higher, densities are higher, and so on and so forth. So I'll stop there and say that I think besides looking at improvements in planning, design, and infrastructure per se, we need to also think about institutions and processes of service delivery in city, and how do we look at that through the current planning frameworks that we have, which tend to be very spatial, in the way that they are articulated in law. Thank you.
Thanks, Mukta. And as usual, I'll challenge you with a related question, which you can hang on to and come back to later. You mentioned that inclusive urban policies require and action in cities require sensitization of various stakeholders. Point well taken, and absolutely in agreement with that. But what should be the focus of sensitization? Can we make a pitch that cities need all hands on the deck to achieve its vision over the next, let's say, 25 years? If Varanasi is planning to become the pilgrimage tourist hub in India or globally, it requires a lot of action and can't be done only by a segment of population. If you are uplifting the marginalized communities, creates business interests as well, which, so all I'm saying are the backward and forward linkages. If India is aiming to become a $5 trillion economy, you need to increase your work participation rate, and that can happen only on inclusion. So it's very important for us to understand where do we pitch with various stakeholders. If we keep doing the ways, if we keep going the traditional way, I don't think we'll be able to cut much ice with them. Thanks once again, Mukta. Now I would reach out to Professor Chattopadhyay, and my question is, how can local agencies promote participatory planning involving various vulnerable groups in the city? All of us since morning have been hearing about the need for participatory planning and designing. So how do local agencies reach out to women, persons with disabilities, sexual and gender minorities, children, elderly, urban poor, among others?
Well, thank you very much. Am I audible? Is this working? Okay, great. I thought I would be coming later, but Suri, no bias against me. Okay, so a wonderful stage has been set already. And some of the participants and panelists have blamed squarely our profession, the planners. They have very, very interestingly said that we are not planners and the planners are not taking care. So I would brave it and I'll say that I am an architect planner. Blame me if you want, but let's have a forum to discuss, okay? And planning is multifaceted. Planning is not just us with a degree in planning. Suriji has asked me about the vulnerable groups and how we could include them in participatory planning. He has included under the vulnerable groups several sections, children to start with. And I would say that I'll start with the children. And I think that we definitely should make attempts to include children in the decision making in various ways. I have small time, so I'll try to make it quick. An example, walking bus, which is not just a bus, it's school children forming a bus, and there is a conductor who's also a person and a driver, all notional. Children helping each other to reach the school. Fantastic. I have seen examples in Sweden where children are actually made, school children, young school children are made to manage traffic on a particular day in a week. Why? Because then they learn how to cross, how to make others cross, what is a pedestrian crossing. They learn these things maybe at class 2 level. Cognitive mapping, I have also seen this. And actually my son was studying in a school in Sweden, and I learned from him and his school that what is cognitive mapping? At, I would say class 1 level, they would be taken to a butterfly trail. And on coming back, they would be asked to do a cognitive mapping. So what I'm trying to say is, we cannot make changes overnight. We have to start very, very early. So children can definitely make a very big pitch in terms of planning. In terms of, let's say, playful bins, we are not still used to chucking our garbage in the right place. But we could make them playful, and children would then insist that they definitely use them. Take an example of the Neela Madhav Basti. We had just been, we are working in the SAR project, and we saw in Bhubaneswar, this Neela Madhav Basti has done a wonderful job where these children, through paintings and sketches, have suggested to the planning authorities that what should be the look and feel of their community. And the authorities have taken it up. So I thought that was a good way of involving children into the mainstream. Suriji, the next group is the, let's say, the elderly, okay, or the women, okay. We saw in Bhubaneswar SAR project, Hamara Bachpan, an NGO doing incredibly good job. And in short, what they're doing is they're training up the female population of communities in self-defense, in health and hygiene, and in making them economically independent. So they're not doing everything under the sun, but they have said that we are targeting under these 3 steps. And there were demonstrations. Our students were also there. These girls demonstrated simple techniques of how to defend themselves. And I tell you, they really appeared geared up. They really appeared that they have evolved. The confidence level was amazing. So we could talk about that. And under the PWD section, another vulnerable section, we could also have accessibility audits in all kinds of public spaces, buildings. We could do visibility mapping of signages, because our signages are abysmally poor. I often look out for signage. I don't find them. I look out for traffic signals. I don't find them because a tree is shading it. We don't know exactly where to put it. So we could do that. We could also have tour packages with special need facilities, which is again a new concept here. We don't have too many travel agents who say that the tour entirely would be friendly. So nobody would have any issues at all. You talk about the urban poor, and I think that it's definitely a good idea to have the urban poor in the projects like slum relocation, in terms of land use planning and putting informal sector in the mixed land use. These people can definitely tell you where the market is and they can help us. Elderly was another group which you talked about. And I think that elderly people, and some of us are already in that group, they have a very keen sense of, attachment to a place they live in. And if we can include them for micro details in planning, like plantation, what kind of plantation needs to be done in this community? What kind of, garbage collection? Which are the crime hotspots? What is the decibel level in the community? I think elderly people can give us a lot of ideas about planning. And this is planning with the help of people, participatory. I will just say, how much time do I have? I mean, have they? Oh, long time back it was 0. Okay. I would just urge the people to say that we have given specific, packages in our ICF, Inclusive City Framework, which I wanted to touch upon, but she flashes the 0. So I will just pose one question to the audience and leave it. We have been talking about inequality, gender, this, that. I'll take this quote from Sweden and just say that they completely did away in 2012 with the concept of gender. Okay, and take it or not, but the concept is interesting. It says that Swedish people have had 2 gender pronouns for a very long time. Hon, which is for she, and han for he. And in 2012, and that was the time when I knew that they were doing this, they said that let's not have any hon or han. Let's not have he or she. And then they have just one pronoun, han. So they say that the ideas are embedded right at the beginning when we say a blue room belongs to my son and a pink room belongs to the daughter. We are putting the seeds of discrimination right from the beginning, and the Swedish society says that there's no he or she, it's just children. A point to ponder upon. Thank you very much. Thanks for that extra time.
Thanks, Professor Chattopadhyay. Thanks for giving appropriate examples of inclusion of the marginalized communities, not only from India, but globally. Very appropriate examples, I would say. But, all of us would agree that the challenge remains in the Indian cities. All of us would agree that representative participation has not been effective in India. Our elected municipal councillors are not able to convey our aspirations to the city managers. It does not lead to impacts on ground. So the challenge remains, how do we lend a voice to people at large, but more specifically the marginalized communities? If anyone here in the room has lived in Delhi for the past 15 years, might recall the Bhagidari scheme in Delhi, where the resident welfare associations were directly engaged in the decision making, the planning exercise. And I think we need to evaluate that experience and see if we can still use that model for engaging various population segments in decision making, planning, and urban design. That might help to meet the aspirations of the marginalized communities as well. So thanks once again, Professor Chattopadhyay. My question now to Nidhi, and my question to you is, what does a feminist disability perspective to urban development entail? And what are the key challenges faced by women and girls, particularly women and girls with disabilities in the cities?
Right. Thank you so much for this question, and thank you everyone for having me here, and also all the co-panelists who've really beautifully inputted into everything. Just to quickly make this space accessible for my blind and low vision friends, I am an Indian woman in my mid-30s with my hair pulled back with a printed kurta, wearing black trousers and a laptop on my lap. Thinking about what this is, I just did an image description of myself for our friends who cannot see. At every stage, we have the privilege, we have the ability, and we could develop a space, a tool, an action, an activity, a way to make the space inclusive. In this, keeping this in mind, what does a feminist disability lens look like, or approach to urban planning and development look like? It's a question actually that has been resonating, that has been coming back with each panel, with each presentation, and to think through this would be extremely important, particularly in a space like a National Conclave on gender and disability inclusion. A feminist disability perspective really would resonate with the idea of universal design, a space that is for all people standing at multiple intersections, regardless of their ethnicity, caste, class, gender, disabilities, abilities, and so on and so forth. Having equal access to spaces, but also just an equitable distribution or access to resources and opportunities. These feel like really technical terms. What do we mean by resources and opportunities within an urban planning discussion? What would facilities look like, or what would affordability of transport and other spaces mean? But really pulling all the discussions together since morning, starting from what Ms. Puri mentioned around policies and gaps, to our digital inclusion panel, to what we heard from Sneha and others here, it would be extremely important to start reflecting there. My colleagues here said that thinking about gender and disability is also thinking about how we are socialized. What are the key questions? How do we look at this infrastructure? We're talking about, of course, physical and mobility infrastructure. We're talking about social and institutional infrastructure. And we are also talking about the digital infrastructure, which all of these make up a city today. But what would this space mean and look like, right? Before we go to the key challenges, or even to think about the key challenges, right? What would these infrastructures mean when we're saying there's a particular kind of socialization? What would this socialization entail? What are these power structures, as Sneha was mentioning, that resonate or that exist in these spaces? And what are the questions that we need to ask before we start, sharing ideas and thoughts? And the key challenges and questions probably are the questions and the assumptions. Who are these people who stand at the intersection of gender and disability? Are these people with disabilities? Are these women? Are these non-binary people? Are these all of them who are at the intersection of all of this? So which means non-binary people with disabilities. How many of us really know how to unpack this kind of identity? How many of us have met 5 people who stand at this intersection and understand how they navigate spaces, internal, external, urban cities, anything? The question about what are the spaces in urban planning and should be occupied by who? So if we sit in a room and collectively put down thoughts saying who should occupy this space, very often we just say all, leaving no one behind. Having all of us together is a very easy thing to say. But if we break down identities and say, hey, who would stand at the corner of the street? Who do you think would be loitering in the park? Who would access railway stations, or the railway station, which is very frequented by a male-dominated profession, let's say, right? So thinking about who occupies what space is extremely important as a question. Often the issue is that people standing at intersections, so women with disabilities, for example, are assumed not to be contributing, are assumed not to have procured education, not to be contributing productively to society, regardless of the fact that we really, as Sir was saying, that we need to really account for what are these numbers? What are we missing out? What's the cost of exclusion? 7% of GDP when we're talking about who's not within the workforce and why. So who's accessing the financial institutions and the justice institute? So who are these income earners? Who are the taxpayers who are occupying these spaces are the real challenge, or the real questions that we need to sit down and pose to even start thinking about how we are socialized and what assumptions do we carry as people within societies, as people in diverse professions, as people who come together to create these cities and make them safe, accessible, and inclusive. We conducted a study during COVID at Rising Frame, and we had respondents from all across the countries who were women with disabilities. 70% of our respondents mentioned that we face inaccess. Accessibility is the key challenge. Digital, physical, and infrastructural, informational inaccessibility. And because of this combination, what they faced was violence, abuse, and lack of emotional well-being. So the idea, and very often people ask, how's this access in city and everything connected to women, and why do you always connect it to gender and women, right? The question is because of the systems and the socializing that we have, this is the way the society is structured, we really have these connections where there's a larger impact on the mental health, well-being, physical health, violence faced, and also overall roles, responsibilities, and access to opportunities that women and other non-binary persons face within this society. Whoever's keeping time, you'll have to give a verbal cue. Yeah, okay, thank you. We're basically talking about safe and inclusive and accessible cities. What does this mean for women with disabilities, since Mrs. Suri specifically asked for that? It's really independence, dignity, and safety all coming together. Yeah, 1 minute I'll need. Thank you. At least I know I'm crossing time consciously. Just to give you a quick example of when we did this access audit or a safety audit, whichever way you put it, with disabled and non-disabled women, there were many commonalities. They said we feel safe when the roads are lit up. We feel safe when we have our mobile phones. We feel safe if there's someone who knows. But for women with disabilities, they also said we feel safe if we can cross the street. We feel safe if we don't have to every time hold a stranger's hand. We also feel safe if we would feel safe if there were low floor buses and nobody had to touch us and transfer us physically. So really thinking about what these spaces entail around accessible toilets, right? Just sanitation that Sneha mentioned. Are we looking at accessible toilets at different points? And are we looking at gender inclusive accessible toilets? So where does a trans person with a disability go just for the simple point of using a toilet, right? Housing and development, how many women with disabilities can move to another city to have accessible housing available? And really thinking about digital infrastructure and what that brings when I can't, I may have the money, I may have access to internet, I may have technology, which is also privilege for many women. Its technology ownership is not very common for women, right? In spite of that, I may not be able to order that grocery. I may not be able to order for the transport or check transport schedules and what that would mean. So really shifting from just safety, shifting from just having or at the least of provisions to full inclusion, to meaningful participation in society and in our cities. Many of the solutions that I was going to suggest around training, around inclusive, around participation in decision makings, around local engagement with local bodies have been covered. So I will pause here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nidhi. Thanks for bringing up the issue of intersectionality of the marginalized groups and the challenges faced in accessing public spaces as well. Very specifically, you have brought up the challenges faced by the women with disabilities as well. So thank you very much, Nidhi. Let me move to our last panelist for this session, Riti Mandal. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And my question to you is, how does safety or the lack thereof in particular impact women's use and experience of the city?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Suri. Thank you, NIUA and everyone here for inviting SafetyPin to this wonderful discussion. So to begin with, I think most of what I wanted to say has been covered with this panel. But I will touch upon two main things, which I think is, plays a vital role. The way women kind of use cities, and the way Nidhi has already kind of explained very beautifully what really intersectionality means, women with disabilities and how they are kind of accessing the city. So like, if you have to really understand, we do understand that the city is seen, understood, and experienced by different people in different way. And which is where this understanding of intersectionality really plays a big role, because each one of us, our experience is different from the other. And women's experience of the city, this collective experience of the city, also has been around, experience around fear and harassment and violence while accessing the city. Of course, patriarchy has a big role to play in it, and how we are made to understand the city and the narrative around, when you access the city in a certain way. And the narrative is also built by many factors of our everyday life. So some of the global numbers which we are there with us for a long time, 1 in 3, it says that 1 women in 3 have experienced some form of violence in their lifetime, whether it's violence inside their homes or outside in the open. But this whole narrative about, fear and harassment and violence has curtailed our access in the city. And women are also expected with their different roles and responsibilities in the city. So what if we shift this focus from a crime-based focus in the city, that, it's women's responsibility to keep themselves safe, to access the city in a certain way, to negotiate the city in a certain way. What if we shift this focus from a crime-based, focus to designing a city which focuses on women's roles, women's needs, women's, responsibilities which they have to be in the city. So what if we design a city for care? What if we design a city around care work? We know, and like Sneha has explained very nicely, that women's pattern of mobility in the city is different than that of men, or somebody with, other intersectionalities. They traverse in the city differently than, a 30-something able-bodied person who is kind of has the all the access, or all the important things which you need to be in the city with them. So in such a situation, if we have to understand the city from a care work perspective, we have to understand that, and in COVID, I think that has put all these issues in focus very clearly, when we see that when we are, this public space is taken away from us, and we are there inside our homes. And there, for the first time, I think men understood that, when there is nobody else to help, and you have to look after your work, your children, your elderly, everything is your responsibility. And that is where I think a lot of figures and numbers also came into play. We understood, how domestic violence had gone up. We had understood that what is the time which men had given to housework. Okay, so things like that, which has put this care work, and which is also called sometimes the burden of care, which is already on the shoulders of women. And how this has been, central to our living in cities. I mean, if we have to go about, raising children, raising the next generation, somebody is responsible for it. And that responsibility lies on women. And how the traverse in the city then has to be understood from this care work perspective. So basically you build cities. So you build cities understanding that you need support functions, not only to give access to women to go to work, but also for their everyday life functioning. You need childcare centers, elderly centers, grocery, something within walkable distance, which is reached, time poverty is also another big thing which has to be understood. So all these perspectives, when you kind of start unpacking it, you understand that how 50% of the population is actually invisible in the city. Most of the mapping when we do is done during the during the peak hours of the city. So the mobility of women are not visible in the peak hours. They're visible in the non-peak hours, and which is what the mobility pattern kind of throws. And such insightful studies needs to be done to understand how women use city. And I think the last thing what I want to make just before my time gets over is that data and evidence is essential in this. Without understanding, without mapping, without creating evidence, you can't you can't create solutions around it. When you have these numbers and figures with you, you can say that, and evidence with you, you can say that this is where the intervention is required. That is how you do your intervention. So yeah, I think I can end there and then add more to other questions.
Thanks, Suriti. And as promised, I think we are very efficient in time management. And we just have time enough for 3 questions from the audience. Please raise your hands. I see a hand up here. My request to the participants is, please state your name and the name of the panelist to whom you are directing your question.
So my question is to Vishakha and Mukta combined. So when you spoke, there was an undertone of that policy is not important, law is not important, implementation is important. But when she was speaking in the beginning of her presentation.
Can you state your name, please?
Okay, yeah. So I'm Raja Singh. I'm an architect from School of Planning and Architecture, accompanying my professor Anil Devan. So
also my professor.
Oh yeah.
Also her.
Professor. Absolutely. So yeah. Yeah. So when you were speaking in the beginning, it was like that, implementation is important. But don't you think that implementation is step 2? Step 1 is the very important thing of having very good laws. And there should be no compromise on that. And we are here for that first part to begin with.
Yeah, so just to answer the question, absolutely, no question about it. I think because I was speaking from the perspective of a lawyer, at least in the legal frameworks I outlined, we have very good laws. The laws are very good. The RPwD is a very well-drafted law, and I'm sure Nidhi and others would be able to speak to that. India has not had a problem. In fact, we have, I don't know how to say it. We have very good laws. We have very poor implementation. So the problem with this conversation is that our lawmakers have recognized it, and literally everything that you want to look at, I can find a provision that guarantees it already. But how do you translate it into your neighborhood? So the problem is the elephant in the room for me is that there is very little thinking about post-law. What do you do once you pass the law? Now, for instance, criminal law amendments have taken place after horrible, publicly violent rapes in this country. Have the cities become safer? So 10 years after the Nirbhaya case that happened in Delhi, do you feel safe in Delhi? So that solution then is not a legal solutions are actually, ultimately, we all need to come together as communities. So that is what is missing in the current moment, according to me. So we have laws, how do we better implement it so that it's translated? So I'll just give it.
It's not even as simple as law and implementation. It's everything in between those two. So the law has to translate into something which is a policy, that policy has to translate into something which is broken down into schemes, initiatives, and not just government schemes. I mean, an initiative in which what will the private sector do in this? What will a set of employers do in this? So all the stakeholders that we talk about, the stakeholder ecosystem that we have. So let's not think in binaries here. So law and implementation is also a fake binary, because there's a lot of stuff between the law and the implementation. For the purposes of this panel, I think if we look through the perspective of the city, then we're also thinking about things like finance. We're thinking about things like capacities. We're thinking about things like what is the design of the collaboration between different stakeholders, and how can the government nudge it in a particular way. So we're thinking very complex system design problems in addition to just law and implementation. Just wanted to add that.
Just to complement what both of you have said, take the example of disability inclusion. We have the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. But then why did the national government again need to re-emphasize the point and say, we are launching the Sugamya Bharat campaign? It's because impacts were not visible on ground. And when NIUA became a part of it, in partnership with FCDO, what did we do? We reviewed the entire policy landscape, identified the gaps, and then we realized that the cities, even if they want to make a change, are not adequately equipped with skills. So the focus on capacity building, the guidelines. So we have the standard harmonized guidelines. We have the URDPF revised guidelines in place as well. And we are also providing the handholding support. So the point I'm conveying in response to your question is, and very rightly so, Mukta, it can't be a one solution kind of an approach. It's not either or, but it's a combination of factors, right from policies to strategies to guidelines to implementation support. And let's not even try and underestimate the significance of finance. Let's not forget the cities are struggling with development funds. So how do cities manage that as well? So it's a long, long battle. We can't have a simplistic solution to the urban problems. Any other questions?
Yeah, hello. Am I audible? Hi, I'm Shabina. So I would like to share one anecdote. So long back, I was doing one focus group discussions with young group of college students to check how Delhi is safe for them. They were visually impaired. How Delhi is safe for them in terms of transit and mobility. So one student from JNU, he shared that whenever I access the metro station, that's beautifully designed and totally accessible. And there is a scope of like getting a assistant, escort. So whenever he used to get that assistant, he said, always I have been made to sit in the ladies' coach. Where is the perception? What is the perception about person with disability? If it is the man or boy, and whether it is disabled or non-disabled, they are categorized as women. I don't know. Means it was a very sarcastic comment on all of us, how we perceive men with disability. Are we equating them with the women in general? So these are the things which we need to highlight to check the attitudinal shift which we have right now. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing this anecdote. I think very appropriate in the conversation that we are having. Let me take two questions. First from the gentleman in the second row, and then we'll come to you, Mamta.
Thank you so much, all the panels. And thanks a lot for sharing this. I was just asking to Madhura ma'am. My name is Vinay Kumar. I'm so sorry. And I am from an organization named IDEA, coming with my founder and CEO. So ma'am, as you just shared that intersectionality. So if I will start with a very small story. So we used to support the women with disabilities, to support them with a small fund to start their businesses. So we have observed that the accessibility and inclusivity within their households, within their home, is quite a challenge. So government can like build the city inclusive, but when we are asking for their home inclusivity, women are not the decision maker. So we are supporting few of the women and they have built their small businesses. And one of the cases where I visited the home, then their husband said that, ठीक है, मतलब क्या फर्क पड़ता है, इतने सालों से चला आ रहा है, क्या ऐसा कुछ है नहीं हमारे यहाँ 8 लोग हैं तो 7 लोग नॉर्मल है, एक इनके लिए क्या, ये मतलब he was not having the like वो व्हील चेयर पे थे तो पैरों से चल सकते हैं. So I was just asking to understand how we as an organization, non-for-profit organization, and how as a government stakeholders can intervene and how this can be dealt so that we can make inclusive households as well, inclusive homes as well. Thank you so much.
I think this is such an important question, and it's actually a big reflection for all of us, you know, who really think about making so many things inclusive out there, but we're really not looking at, you know, within the home space. The question that you asked is something that we are all in the gender space working on. We've been really working on really building women's agency, autonomy, you know, trying to, I think this one point that one of my colleagues made is, I think Nidhi made that point, was independence, dignity, and safety. If we don't start from within homes, where do we get? So we're really working on that. We're trying to really work with, gender norms, trying to bring about changes in the social norms, gender norms within households. How do you really look inwardly? And I think the government is making a lot of, efforts towards collectivization of women, and that's where I think the SDG movement has really played a big role. So there's a lot of plan happening. I think this is another important forum. And yeah, I think we can have more bilateral, discussions with you going forward. But yeah, that's all I had to say now.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Mamta?
Just on the question of dignity, his remark prompted my this thing. Several years back, we did a study on women's personal hygiene, and we found that while toilets were being constructed, not used is another matter. There was nobody was thinking of the personal bathing space. So, and that's something that we all see, but we don't sort of figure it in our head as to how do you even plan a little space house that also gives her that dignity and that privacy to have personal space, to have a full body bath at least once or twice a year. So that's something, again, for us to look at when we're looking at housing designs. My comment was on data, and really, you shared the example of mobility data, how important it is to understand that. And some work we've done with Mumbai Metro, I think the report will be released sometime early next month, also reveals the kind of gender patterns and mobility patterns and how then you plan your, whatever around it. But also in terms of, when we're looking at city, we talked about child friendly, we talked about disability, we talked about safety. And when we started BASIC, we had this great ambition that perhaps we can bring all these three, there must be some common sort of core indicators in a city, because cities planned this once, right? We can't just, you can have a space which is accessible, may not be safe, may not be child friendly, and so on and so forth. Is there a way you think, and we don't have to answer it, but at least think about it, where we can bring all these three aspects together to really look at it as a composite whole and say, okay, at least if you want to do this, these are the 5 things you need to make sure. We have our safety parameters, we have our disability audit parameters. Can we turn it into something? We turned your paper safety audits into an app. Can we do something similar? So just a question and see you had. So we're going to add one more question. Can I respond to that in one second? Yep.
It's maybe an extension to this. My name is Kavi Arya. I was in the earlier panel. To Mukta and the others, you said that you have a law which is energy, and by the time it gets to implementation, it's dissipated, right? In your own words, okay? Where does it get maximally dissipated? And what can one do to kind of amplify the signal there again, speaking in the language of an engineer?
Sorry, just wanted to respond to Mamta in one sentence quickly. It really is when we sit and define collectively what access means. So the campaign that I shared was called My Access, right? And how safety, accessibility, and the other parameters that you said, we start putting that under the larger right and bracket of access and then defining the indicators, that would really help. So that's a really solid and robust way to go about it, which would include accessibility audit, social audit, safety audit, all of that. Yeah, thank you.
And I would like to say it in one word, which is participation. So I really like this lady who has been, in a way, a mentor, Anna Falu, and she has been an Argentinian woman who is a urban designer and an urban planner, and she has been championing this cause, saying that it's participation, participation, and participation. If 3 things you have to think about cities for women, you make opportunities for women to participate in the city. So if we have that word as the key word, then we can drive all kind of indicators from that, understanding, how a city of care or how a city of which is accessible, inclusive, safe, everything will fall under that. But the main thing is to make women visible.
Yeah, I'll actually respond to Kavi Arya's point with the same word, when I spoke about the impetus for law creation and the demand and the sort of mechanisms through which it comes to be, many laws actually come to be because of the voice of a particular type of constituent. That doesn't mean that that law has larger buy-in in society or in bureaucracy or in the political space as a whole. So I think that's why it differs, that impetus, where it flags and where the impetus has to be provided will differ from law to law and sector to sector. So for example, if you take labor laws, if there is a weakening of provisions for workers, and that may be coming arguably from the private sector, then the private sector is not going to implement provisions that slow down their business. It's a tangled web. Then the impetus is already, it's losing impetus with the stakeholders who are actually being scrutinized by the law. So right at the first go, it's losing impetus, which means you need to come to the problem with a completely different set of eyes. So it's a complicated question, and it will have to be dealt with like sector by sector, because if the problem is that there is buy-in all the way and it's only a question of finance and capacity, then you have an easier problem to solve. The case I'm making is that you may have a problem much further up the chain.
Thanks. Yeah, please.
If I can get another 40 seconds and to answer Madam, because she was talking about the implementation strategy. In fact, what I couldn't touch upon, I'll quickly say that since the ULBs, the urban local bodies, are the implementation authorities, we in our ICF, Inclusive City Framework, gave a step-by-step, 5-step approach. And quickly they were, number 1, strategic accessibility analysis. Number 2, inclusivity score. So each ULB could actually do an inclusivity score. 3 was recommendation, which is feedback from stakeholders. 4 was implementation. And 5 was review and monitoring. I'm just giving you the points, but in each of these steps, we had actually included all the groups, all the stakeholders we wanted. Also, we had suggested 2 implementation and monitoring strategies. Number 1, as an advisory forum at the district level, and also an inclusivity cell in the ULB. Much in similar lines, we have Heritage Commission and Heritage Cell. But this is a new area, and we are, talking about macro and a micro level. So this is one thing which I wanted to, because you raised the question. We have also given a very extensive, ICF recommendation on 6 sectors. You said, which are the 5? We identified 6 areas, which includes housing and outdoor, mobility, IT, livelihood, and tourism. So we thought that these are the 6 sectors in which inclusivity has to be looked into, and gave 23 components under these 6 sectors and 196 indicators. So quite an extensive bit of recommendations. If you have time, you could take a look. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I take note of all the hands raised at the back. No, let me take one, because we've already overshot the time by 15 minutes. So please, your observation in 30 seconds flat, please.
Cities, most of the people who has been migrated or settled in the cities are from marginalized community. It may be a Dalit, Adivasi, or whoever it may be. So while collecting the data and whether any segregation is made on the social background of the people, because the various disability that they have, they face different challenges, as they have been said by many. Just I want to have the question on the disaggregated data, whether it is the social system and other things, background of the people has been recorded. If done the case, the policy interventions and other things will be very meaningful for the specific set of people. So it is a general question to the NHIA.
Well, let
Thank
me
you.
try and answer this on behalf of the panel. Yes, all of us realize and appreciate the advantages of disaggregated data, not only for planning, but also program design and monitoring. But that's a continued challenge that the cities are facing. The only intertemporal data that's available at predictable intervals are census and NSS. So yes, cities are struggling, and it's the data challenge, not only in India, but over globally, that had promoted the idea of indicators. Indicators are the quick diagnostics and planning tools, which are being increasingly used, given the large weak and zero databases that we have. So I won't even try and sum up the discussions. That's going to take another 5 minutes. But let me end this session by thanking Vishakha and Madhuri for the presentations, Professor Chattopadhyay, Preeti, Nidhi, and Mukta for sharing wonderful ideas on the subject of this panel discussion. And last but not the least, this wonderful audience, which has kept the panel on its feet and alive and ready for the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you so much, Mr. Ajay Suri and the rest of the panelists for such an insightful session. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a slight change in the program. If you were the presenter for the next session, we would like to inform you that we are taking the launch session first before your session. So in case you were the presenter, we apologize for this delay. So now I would like to invite Mr. Hitesh Vaidya, the director NIU, who have guided the NIU through the urban development program and have spearheaded numerous technological initiatives. Since we are promoting the usage of technology for mainstreaming disability inclusion in our urban agenda, it would only be fair if you could launch the guide and digital toolkit on inclusive, accessible, safe, and resilient urban development. I would also like to call upon Ms. Sangeeta Mehta, Portfolio Manager for Infrastructure and Urban at the British High Commission, Ms. Parul Agarwala, Country Program Manager, UN Habitat India, Alka Arya, Software Production Coordinator, UN, and Kanika Bansal, Senior Program Associate of NIUA. Kindly come over to the stage. But before we have this presentation, I would also make an announcement that one of our guests has lost the key, the car keys. So in case if somebody has found it, so kindly submit it at the registration desk, please. Thank you.
The Guide on Inclusive, Accessible, Safe, and Resilient Urban Development has been designed as an easy reckoner for urban practitioners to embed the principles of universal design and inclusion in planning, implementing, monitoring, and evaluation of infrastructure projects. The document follows the principle of leave no one behind and seeks to include the marginalized and vulnerable population groups, such as persons with disabilities, chronic conditions, women and children, pregnant women, new mothers, the aging population, and LGBTQ, among others in urban design and practice. The four main sections of this guide are: the project cycle section lists out the basic minimum a project team should do or follow in each stage of the project to ensure an inclusive and accessible urban development. The sector-specific guidelines section contains simplified sectoral checklists for common public projects to ensure accessibility provisions. The monitoring and evaluation section helps in assessing the existing infrastructure and services in compliance with the accessibility standards. The Inclusive Resilience Strategies section defines the strategies for a holistic and intersectional approach for the inclusion of persons with disabilities in all humanitarian efforts.
Thank you. I would like to give a small brief about the digital toolkit and the guidebook. In order to achieve the principle of leave no one behind and commitments of the Sustainable Development Goal, it is imperative to include marginalized and vulnerable demographics, such as persons with disability, women and children, pregnant and new mothers, persons with chronic condition, aging population, persons with temporary disability, and LGBTQI+, among the others, in design and construction of the design and urban design and planning of urban areas. This digital toolkit and the guidebook work as an interactive and integrated guide for the development of an inclusive urban environment covering various aspects and stages of a project. The toolkit as well as the guidebook is divided into 4 sections, namely project cycle, sector-specific guidelines, monitoring and evaluation, audit toolkits, inclusive resilience strategies. Each section sets fundamental understanding and highlights significance of inclusion and universal accessibility and provides the minimum requirement standards, guidelines, and technical details to be adopted by urban practitioners across all states, UTs in India, on to ensure gender sensitive as well as disability inclusive urban design. The primary aim of the toolkit is to operationalize inclusion and accessibility needs in compliance with accessibility guidelines and standards set forth by Government of India, including the Harmonized Guidelines and Standards for Universal Accessibility in India 2021. The sector-specific guidelines in particular contains simplified checklist highlighting the basic minimum criteria for accessibility and inclusion. It also provides visual references, isometric sketches, and reference images as a ready reckoner to ensure technical accuracy in understanding and implementation by urban practitioners. In addition, the interactive design of the toolkit imbibes a sense of sensitivity, empathy among practitioners by taking them through different real-time scenarios. The different checklists focus on an inclusive approach to existing urban challenges and provide the guidelines to inclusive urban planning, design, and implementation of all public infrastructure projects. These checklists would ensure compliance with accessibility guidelines and standards set forth by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. The main aim is to ensure accessible and inclusive urban spaces for all citizens in India. The easy to understand toolkit is available in print form in English, Hindi, and 15 other regional languages, including Bengali, Marathi, Telugu, Tamil, Urdu, Gujarati, Kannada, Malayalam, Odia, Punjabi, Assamese, Konkani, Nepali, Maithili, and Kashmiri. I would now like to request Ms. Parul, Hitesh sir, and Sangeeta ma'am to kindly launch the guidebook. The guidebook is in collaborative effort of NIUA BASIC program as well as UNRCO office whereas with immense efforts and vetting by the experts of universal accessibility, inclusion, gender, and other aspects. The toolkit is in collaboration with UNOICT, and it is available in both on both UN website as well as NIUA website. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Kanika, for taking over and launching this toolkit. We move further to our next session, which is the third session. As we have already discussed formulation of policies and work that needs to be done in the urban scale. In the next panel discussion, we'll be focusing on how we can mobilize our resources and train people so that the inclusive practices are adopted in a way that trickles through the entire system to the last activity on the ground. The next panel discussion, that is localizing inclusion for urbanization, will consist of presentations of 6 case studies that will provide a hands-on understanding on inclusion in planning, designing, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. The session will also attempt to give a practical understanding on the usage of guide and digital toolkit on inclusive, accessible, safe, and resilient urban development, which was launched just now. I would like to call upon Mr. Harpreet Singh Arora to moderate this session. Welcome, sir. Mr. Arora is an urban planner and currently an urban advisor at FCDO. He has an experience spanning more than 15 years as an urban and regional economist across the urban development sector, governance, and policy planning. I now welcome our revered presenters, Dr. D. Vasudevan, the Chief General Manager of Varanasi Smart City Limited. He has 40 years of industry experience specializing in IT management, consulting ICT for education, e-governance, and institutional strengthening and capacity building. Mr. G. Mathivathan, the Principal Secretary, Department of Housing and UD, Government of Odisha. He will be available online with us, who is leading a groundbreaking, inclusive, and sustainable initiative and programs such as Odisha Livable Habitat Mission, Jaga Mission, Universal Access to Pipe Water Supply, Vasudha, Garima, a scheme for dignity and safety of manual scavengers, Urban Wage Employment Initiative, Mukta, that the state of Odisha is undertaking. Mr. Sriram Haridas, Deputy Representative from the United Nations Population Fund. He has 19 years of experience in strategic planning and programming in both development and humanitarian context. He has worked with UNHCR for nearly 9 years in Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and South Sudan. Prior to joining UNFPA India, he served as UNFPA Sierra Leone, where he oversaw the implementation of large-scale donor-funded projects and coordinated UNFCA's response to Ebola crisis. Our next expert is Ms. Aishwarya Sehgal, Program Associate, Social and Human Sciences, UNESCO. She is working towards creating gender response to tools for facilitating social inclusion through capacity building, advocacy, and research. Ms. Parul Agarwala, she is the next expert, Country Program Manager, UN Habitat India. She's an urban development practitioner with experience in strategic policy analysis, land use and spatial planning, housing, and economic development. Last but not least, I would like to call upon my colleague, Ms. Manishi Singh, Program Officer for the Cities Program at NIUA. Ms. Manishi has more than 6 years of experience in the urban development sector, which includes working at NITI Aayog on various urban thematic areas like solid waste management, smart cities, water recycling and reuse, urban governance, urban housing and transport. She's also the recipient of Australia's award South and West Asia 2020. And she's done a short course on promoting resilient and sustainable infrastructure development. So welcome you all for this thematic presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And if you can hear me, okay. just wanted to confirm is our distinguished guest, Mr. Mathivatnan, has been able to join from his office virtually before we start this. And my sincere apologies on behalf of whoever delayed this. I can't name one because there'll been many people participation to do this. And thank you so much for an extra amount of resilience that you've shared, and especially our senior colleague, Mr. Mathivatnan, who's been patiently waiting for last 1 hour. Thank you very much, sir. Can you see all of us? Because we can see you.
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Thank you very much. So the way to get the upper hand is to say that nobody can understand. And we've already been engaged in about 200 words per minute marathon since 9:30, which in my mathematical calculation says about 200 pages, with about 500 pages, 500 words on the page. So we've said about 200 pages of conversation already here. What we're doing in this session is actually actualizing, understanding how these things have actually been actioned. And it's a great privilege to have a lot of other colleagues here, including colleagues from cities like Varanasi, representation from state of Odisha, and also my colleagues from UN, and also from the cities program at the NIUA. I'm going to take little liberty because we've made better representation of colleagues who are in the virtual mode. And if I can request Mathi sir to come first, because I think you've waited much longer than others, because we've been sipping coffee and tea as well to compensate for the time that's been lost. So if I could request you, Mathi sir, to come first with
Yes,
your
sir.
presentation.
Thank you so much for the special consideration for your inclusive management, sir.
That's the least I can do. Can we have the slides up, please?
Yes, sir. I am sharing.
Thank you, sir.
Is my screen visible, sir?
Yes, your screen is visible, sir.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I thank the organizers for giving such a wonderful platform to discuss, to deliberate such a very important topic of how to achieve inclusive urban governance and development. So I will be sharing in my presentation the experiences of Odisha in the inclusive governance area, especially related to the transgenders. So at the outset, I would like to start with a question: why should we support transgenders? The moment the transgenders get to know their true sexual identity, once the manifestations start happening, the family starts hating them. They experience the family boycott. There is a social stigma. They are victimized. They are exploited very badly. And you might have noticed that transgender is typically as an urban issue. I don't know whether you have noticed it or not. It's typically an urban issue. Wherever the transgenders are from, the moment the manifestations start happening, somehow they reach the urban areas, cities, nearest cities. The urban area provides anonymity and community living for the transgenders. Most of them end up begging or as sex worker. You will find in the Delhi traffic junctions, whichever toll gate you cross, you can't miss them. The transformational journey of urban Odisha in the last few years follows an inclusive urban development and governance approach. So we have lots of partners, the women self-help groups, transgenders, rag pickers, and the Slum Dwellers Association, the community collectives, are partnering with us in various our urban development governance and initiatives. The areas include the water supply, the affordable meal program AHAR, solid waste management, septage management, Jaga Mission, the slum upgradation program, the urban wage employment initiative Mukta, property tax collection, parking area management, lot more services. We engage the community collectives, including the transgenders. So at the state level, we have more than 17,000 community collective members as our partners. Transgenders, about more than 300 from 58 transgender groups are currently partnering in various programs. We started our partnership with the transgenders in the solid waste management in the year 2019. We started the journey from Paradeep. So they were entrusted with the responsibility of the entire solid waste management value chain, starting from collection, door-to-door collection, to transportation, to processing in the micro composting center and the material recovery facility, and the final disposal, including you will find the photographs where they manage various activities in the well center. We call the well center as the micro composting center and the material recovery facilities. Together we call them as well center, waste to well center. They drive the waste vehicle also. Inspired by the Paradeep's solid waste management experience engaging the transgender, many cities in Odisha have followed the same method. They have also engaged the transgender. 26 cities, they have engaged about 45 transgender groups with 134 transgender members engaged in the solid waste management activities. The next major activity was the handing over the responsibility of operation and management of a septic treatment plant. You know, Odisha is a pioneer in septic treatment process. We started in 2018 with about 6 plants. Now we have more than 101 plants operational in the entire state. And one of the biggest plant is in Cuttack, which has been handed over to the Cuttack transgender, the transgender self-help group, and they have been managing this for the past 2 years. They sign a contract agreement with the municipal commissioner, and they are paid monthly charges for that. And in the municipal corporations, we have onboarded the transgender groups for managing the parking areas. The newspaper reports that has come in Telegraph and Times of India, you can see in Bhubaneswar, in Barampur. Followed by the encouraging responses, we have started engaging them in the property tax collection also in the large municipalities, including the municipal corporations. You will find the photographs in Bhubaneswar, where they move with the additional commissioner and joint commissioner. They are provided with, a vehicle, provided with the uniform, an ID card, and they move with the officials for the property tax collection. And in a very short period, they have collected more than 3.3 crores rupees, and they have got an incentive of more than 5 lakh. 5% of the revenue is given to them as an incentive. The latest of the activity is the managing the water treatment plant. So we were wondering why we are involving them only in the solid waste and the septage, unclean, polluting activities. Why not in clean activities? So then we decided that we should engage them in managing the water treatment plant. So we decided one of the largest plant in Cuttack, 8 MLD water treatment plant. So we roped in the transgender group. This group has got about 35 members, very large group, taking over the responsibility. They were given a training of about 15 days in 3 days of classroom training, followed by 12 days of the on-site plant hands-on training was provided, and a contract has been signed with the group. Now they are successfully managing the water treatment plant. And followed by the successes, we have entrusted the 25 water kiosks in Bhubaneswar to manage that. The chief executive officer of the BASIIC has signed an agreement with the transgender group. You will see the photograph. There was an opportunity in the year 2020 to have one office assistant in the urban local bodies. So yes, the post of office assistant was created. So we thought that we can engage the transgender and the physically challenged. So we reached out to them, and then with their association, and then we managed to get 38 transgenders and 72 physically challenged. Only the spinal injured we have roped in, and we could get only 72. 110 disadvantaged people have been engaged in the urban local body as office assistant, and for that purpose we have slightly reduced the qualification and experience requirement also. So these are some of the tweets and the newspaper reports on engagement of transgenders in the urban governance initiatives. Durga Shankar Mishra, the former secretary MOA, has made a very nice tweet congratulating the group. So the left-hand side is the group that is managing the Cuttack Seepage Plant, the FICCI, India's Sanitation Coalition. 2021, they have got the Women Change Makeover Award, National Award. So this group we got from the Cuttack traffic signals, receiving arms. So that group has now gone up to national level and received a national award. That too in a women change maker category. A transgender getting a women change maker category itself is a transformation, we can say. And that transgender receiving felicitation from the Honorable Governor Odisha in one of the functions. And on the right hand side, you will find the transgender group representing the state to showcase Odisha's success story in the regional conference organized by MOA at Chhattisgarh in March. So in less than 2 years of our engagement with the transgenders, they have reached great heights of getting national award and higher level felicitations. So our experience has been give them opportunity, create the ecosystem, and they can surpass your expectations. So this is from Sheetal Bastia, the secretary of the Cuttack transgender group. She says in her own words in Odia, which has been translated, for us, going to the plant is like going to temple. Through this opportunity, we have been able to create a mark for ourselves in our communities and family. The family members who had abandoned us are now welcoming us. We are very proud of our contribution and achievement. We have learned so much that we already feel like professionals. This is a huge, we are not just a transgender, but our plant managers. This is a huge leap in our identity. From the very words of Sheetal Bastia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I think you've given a very good example, something that we struggle to put an example of how policy to actioning inclusion can be done. And then there were actually conversations about what should one do, And you actually said that, take the first step, and then obviously inclusion has so many meanings here. I would now request my colleague from Varanasi, Dr. Vasudev. He's got a case study on Sugamya Kashi, a disability inclusive lighthouse project that he spoke earlier about, but this is a presentation on work that Smart City Authority in Varanasi has delivered. So maybe I'll request, and thank you so much, Mati sir, once again. I hope you can stay back with us for some more time. If there are questions, we'll direct it to you. But this is really very helpful, the presentation that you made. We at least got one good case study of actioning inclusion, and that too in the urban context. We didn't have to go too far to do that. I'll request Dr. Vasudevan to take his time, about 5 or 6 minutes of generous time that he's get.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
You have been hearing the name of Varanasi since morning in several occasions, in several contexts. And thank you very much for that. Hopefully we have done some good work in the disability inclusion. The opportunity came by way of the National Institute of Urban Affairs when they started this BASIIC program. They wanted to start with a couple of cities. So they approached us and we happily accepted and signed an MOU. That was the beginning, and it's a beginning for good. So through this partnership, we did quite a lot of things over a 2 years period. We have done a lot of technical assistance program, workshops. We work with the various stakeholders because Varanasi Smart City per se has a limited scope and mandate. So just with that mandate, we won't be able to do good things with the city. So we reached out to the other stakeholders, the Municipal Corporation, Development Authority, PWD, and all those who are concerned with the cities. As a part of the program, city audit was carried out with a couple of pilots locations, and with the outcome and research. So we further refined our strategy So the entire city was audited and create a kind of a accessibility checklist. What works, what doesn't work. So that was quite useful insights. A number of training programs were organized, and typically about 10-15 people attended all of these, the stakeholders. A lot of webinars and lecture series have been conducted and advocacy workshops. And we did distribute a lot of IEC material, both digital and conventional. BASIC program, NIUA has done a wonderful job. So they have been very proactive. They developed a lot of toolkits, audit assessment reports, and our work, much of our work continued through the COVID pandemic. Otherwise, probably we would have produced much better results because the physical visits were quite restricted those days. These are some of the visuals on the program. I would like to talk about the SIGRA Stadium project. These visuals are not the one, because the SIGRA Stadium project, actually today, we actually did the kickoff meeting for the project. The project is just starting, and we are going to do a lot of things. We are going to make this stadium completely accessible. And in the coming days, I will be able to present it. We are just starting the project. It was held up for several reasons. Some of the parks which we developed, and the Benya Bagh and the basement parking, all the infrastructure we built once we got involved. Even otherwise, we are quite conscious of the accessibility. We were better educated with the knowledge and insights got from the BASIC program. All the infrastructures, we try to make it accessible. I'll show some of the visuals. This is some of the results of the audit which came, and those which in red circles are the points, the non-compliance of the accessibility. So I don't want to elaborate. You see the guard, you see the ATM, you see the public toilet and everything. So they very aptly, correctly pointed out. And they did make a recommendation in an existing scenario like this. What should be the ideal scenario? Ideal scenario is very good pictures and recommendations, very difficult to implement. Because when you go on the streets, you find a lot other obstacles and practical problems, unions, shopkeepers, vendors, everybody coming up. So we need to tackle all those things. We try to do as much as possible. And this is another recommendation for a street, how an accessible street should be. And this is another depiction of how an accessible guard should be. And most of these recommendations were implemented in some of the projects. And this is a depiction of a counter and accessible classroom. These are all part of the recommendations of the BASIC study. And wherever we have implemented, some of these have been already cited. We implemented one municipal school was there. So we rebuilt that school, part of Smart City initiative. We made it completely accessible. You might have heard about the Rudraksh International Cooperation Convention Center, which is a Japanese aid to the city. We made it completely accessible and exclusive parking area for wheelchairs, both in the basement, in the auditorium. All the facilities around are completely accessible. And we are very proud to state that. We have one multi-level parking in Godolia. It is again an accessible two-wheeler parking. And ghats are one of the most visited place in Varanasi. So we have taken up, because it's very difficult to convert the existing ghats. So we were renovating one of the new ghat. It used to be called Kidikia Ghat. Now we are going to be renaming it to something different like a Namo Ghat. So it's we made it completely accessible from the existing Raj Ghat to this. So from the car park, actually these cars can directly come and park in this ghat. This is only one of the ghats which has got a car parking facility. Right from there, people could go to the water, and there are CNG boats. The people could take the boats also from there. So completely accessible ghat we developed with a lot of inputs from BASIC program. So we have charted out further roadmap. We are not going to stop from here. All the future planning, we are making it inclusive and accessible. And now accessibility and inclusivity has become part of our DNA. Every project and any project which we are trying to do, we see that how can we make it completely accessible. So that is a small presentation about what we did about Varanasi. If you have questions, I can take it later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vasudevan. Thanks very much. I don't know what other panelists think, but I think sitting here, you definitely feel cold. The air conditioner is really not inclusively planned here. So I don't think we got the memo, but this is very heartening. And I think I'll request the audience to keep some questions ready by the time we finish this session, because I've got one for Dr. Vasudevan already. I'll now request my colleague Sriram, who's a deputy representative at UNFCA, and Sriram is going to talk about making cities socially smart. And there's an experiences from 2 cities that Sriram is going to present. He knows the limitation of time, which will be about 5 to 7 minutes. And looking at the time, I think I'll leave Sriram to do the best judgment of that. Although we don't have anything else to do right after this meeting, but considering that the audience really want to go back home, so that's why. Because we got everything else out of our way.
So now you have given me a free hand, so I can go as long as I want.
Please,
but I won't. Good afternoon, everyone. As you heard, I'm from UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund. Before I go into the program, I don't know how many of you all know actually about UNFPA. So very briefly, we work very closely with our partners, including UN Habitat, to promote social inclusion and the realization of human rights in the context of urbanization. In particular, we work to support the sexual and reproductive health in urban slums, to build the capabilities of young people in the slums, and to promote gender equality. So those are, when it comes to urbanization, some of our key areas of work. As you know, in 2016, the Indian government came out with the Smart City program, the very ambitious Smart City program. So we at UNFPA thought, like, why don't we also be a bit more ambitious? And we partnered with the government in working in 2 of those smart cities, Bhubaneswar and Patna. So we worked hand in hand with the Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation and the Patna Municipal Corporation, not only to make those cities smart, but socially smart. And this we tried doing using the large amount of data that was available and through a consultative process in addressing the critical issues, especially those related to women, young people, and the elderly, through a very consultative process, which I will take you through in a bit. So I am here to talk to you about our experiences in working in those 2 cities. Okay, I'm sure from morning you must have heard a lot of this background, so I will not spend too much time on this. But as you would have heard from the speakers, the urban population in India has drastically increased. We are just waiting for the next census, which has unfortunately got delayed because of COVID. As soon as that is done, I'm sure we will see even a much higher figure. There has actually been a 73% increase from 91 to 2011. So that's, I will not go too much into that. But one thing I just wanted to kind of highlight, the process of urbanization, as most of you know, has not been even across states and even within states. Analysis of available data and macro trends actually shows us that urbanization has not witnessed a typical pyramid structure you would normally find in other countries. For example, typical planned urbanization has a pyramid sort of shape with a major city, urban at the top, and then you have many kind of urban outgrowths at the bottom, supporting the urbanization process, which not only avoids pressure on 1 or 2 cities, but is also able to provide more human capital. Unfortunately, in many of the cities that we work with, we see that has not been the case. So subsequently, what has happened because of this is a larger proportion of urbanization is concentrated in 1 or 2 big cities, putting additional stress. And one thing we have also noticed during our work and everything is most of the or substantial proportion of the urbanization in India seems to be happening because of rural distress, owing to agrarian decline, one reason, and mainly leading to distress migration. So as I told you, this has led to disproportionate rise in slums and slum population in our cities. So like I mentioned, slums are becoming now a striking feature of our urban spaces. For example, the 2 cities that we have worked with, if you take 1/3 of the Bhubaneswar population, and actually 2/3 of the Patna's population, they either live in slums or slum-like conditions. Therefore, if we want to have a sustainable and an inclusive development and urbanization, the focus needs to be on addressing the vulnerabilities of the people who are often left out and living in these fringes of society or in slum-like condition or in slums. Especially, I was actually heartened to hear in the previous panel, there were a lot of reference made to those vulnerable population, women, young people, elderly, especially addressing the needs of them. So unless we address the needs, particular needs of them, we will not be able to have a sustainable urbanization and inclusive development. So how did we go about doing this? There were several approaches we tried. So I'll briefly try and take you through how we kind of try to address this. The involvement of young people to begin with. Our interventions were both youth-led and youth-centric. Projects in both Bhubaneswar and Patna Municipal Corporation mobilized thousands of adolescents and youth in the slums, trained them on life skills education, community development, and through them, we initiated a process of what we call as slum mapping and development plans. So what do we mean by slum mapping? This is the involvement of youth and actually mapping of using them to mapping of services. That actually helped us to look at the resources which were available and services through actually a gender lens. So in essence, the mapping and the plans that were made from the mapping were gender focused. For example, we found that in many places, toilets, they were not very gender sensitive. We found toilets for men and women right next to each other without proper partition. Some places they were not properly lit, so women had problems in using them, after dark hours. And no place or no equipment to change sanitary napkins. This was another issue which came about. Also, distribution of public water facilities were a bit of erratic. So there were a lot of issues like that. Another thing we looked at to see was how to increase access to municipal services in slums. So with a dedicated slum development plan, we worked with municipal corporation and other service providers to ensure the basic municipal services like water, roads, and light. But for me, the most important part is that not what we provided, but they were provided at the locations that were specified by the women that were living in those slums. For me, that was like more important. So in addition to working with youth and women from the slum, another major strategy we had was actually training and building the capacity of elected representatives on gender and rights-based slum development. For example, the ward councillors. So when they got trained, their awareness was raised. They themselves were actually very much interested in providing services that were gender sensitive. Harnessing and developing social capital in slums, basically through whatever I've experienced, I've explained now, but I just want to take a couple of minutes. In the first panel, the previous panel, which I was listening, there were a lot of focus on addressing the vulnerable population who was living within the slums. We all know that the slum population is already vulnerable, but even among that, there are key specific population who are even more vulnerable. And one of them we found is that the women that were from the sanitation worker community. So we did actually a lot of work with them. We found that these women, especially in Patna, are being stigmatized. They did not have access to resources and services. So with great interest and commitment from the Patna Municipal Corporation, we actually introduced mechanized cleaning. That has been introduced through a cooperative society, owned, led, and managed by the women. I'll just take one more minute. And they have received assured work contract from the Patna Municipal Corporation for drainage cleaning. And so this not only gives them a dignity, but also an assured income. The other population, which often people forget, is the elderly. And that's another population we work very closely. For example, during COVID, we had a lot of programs to ensure that they receive the services, including health services, which was needed. With that, I'll just show you very briefly, some of the things we have done. This is, for example, in Bhubaneswar, In addition to what I've already mentioned, we did self-defense training for girls. There was a police interface programs, a legal literacy program, awareness raising on menstrual hygiene, awareness about their rights and entitlement. This you see some of the results. This is from Bhubaneswar. This is before we started the project, and this is actually after. This is from Patna, the toilets, again, before and after. You see the changes here. Again, in Patna, I'll not take time, these are self-explanatory. So, and there have been some recognition as well. In 2018, for example, our work in Bhubaneswar received Best Smart City Award for community mobilization. In 2019, for addressing actions on violence against women. And in 2020, for social interventions. I'm just going to finish. Doesn't mean that everything is kind of rosy and all good. There are, of course, challenges as well. So what are some of those challenges? Sustaining the gains and scaling up. That's one key challenge we faced. Meeting the aspirations of young people and the community. When you involve them, young people have a lot of aspirations. So are we able to meet those aspirations? That's a major challenge. Convergence and support of services, bringing different government departments together to provide the services that are needed. That we found as a major challenge. And then prioritizing social interventions in urban development. That has always been a challenge. It took a lot of work. Fortunately, we had Patna and Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation commissioners who actually saw the value in that. But this took some time as well. I know I have overstepped my mark. Apologies for that.
No,
but with that,
fine.
I'll stop and we'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of the other presenters. Thanks.
Thank you, Sriram. Thank you so much. I'll now request Aishwarya. She's the Program Associate for Social and Human Science at UNESCO. She's going to talk about the role of data in urban governance. It's a case study that Aishwarya is going to speak about. She's got about 7 or 8 minutes. We just held most of you, and I know that you have to leave right after this. But yeah, please do so and use the time that you have. If there's any questions that we'll have for you, we'll try and answer on your behalf.
Or on my email ID. I'll give my email
Or on
ID.
your email ID.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this platform. And it was really interesting to hear all the case studies so far. Many aspects of UNESCO's mandate across education, culture, communication, and information and sciences can be said to be of importance for strengthening the inclusion of persons with disabilities in cities. How those living with disabilities are able to access opportunities for learning and education within our urban spaces is clearly critical for equalizing the playing field. How cultural spaces and creative industries often concentrated in cities are designed and structured can have a significant impact on who is able to benefit from them. And how information and data is collected and governed can have a huge impact on how city spaces are designed to account for different needs. Today, I'll share some details on a new project that we're going to launch soon with the NIUA, looking to strengthen participatory data systems around disability inclusion within Indian cities. First of all, I'd like to highlight why this topic is important within the current context. As we've already mentioned, India is embarking on what is perhaps one of the most ambitious planned urbanization in its history. More than 21 million Indians were recorded as having disabilities in the 2011 census, and 30% of them were living in cities. Over the past decade, these numbers have grown increasingly and concentrated in urban areas, making disability inclusion an increasingly urban problem. But these issues have been exacerbated significantly by the COVID-19 context, with worrying trends that existed even prior to the pandemic. For example, educational inequalities for persons with disabilities are very pronounced. Some 1 in 4 children with disabilities between the ages of 5 and 18 in India have never attended any educational institution. Labor market opportunities for those living with disabilities are less favorable. Less than 0.5% of employees at India's top companies are known to have disabilities. And the challenges faced by women living with disabilities have been some of the most stark across the pandemic. Incidences of hardship, including loss of jobs, violence, and abuse, are significantly higher for women living with disabilities than those from other groups. In short, the pandemic has entrenched many different vectors of exclusion and vulnerability experienced by those living with disabilities. Now, this begs the question of how data can help address these pressing evolving issues. Accurate and reliable data is required in any decision-making process, including in the design, implementation, and evaluation of policies related to the inclusion of persons with disabilities. In India, where cities are often at the forefront of innovation to fulfill the rights of persons with disabilities, the efforts of the government and civil society organizations are hampered by the lack of relevant, up-to-date data and accurate data on the accessibility, experience, and outcome of services to advance the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the economic, social, and political spheres. Official statistics continue to be limited in what they can tell us on these issues. Data on disability is often aggregated at the national level, making it difficult to discern local dynamics and nuances. Additionally, the design of the systems of data collection and analysis often omit to involve representatives of persons with disabilities, creating a risk of data gaps, which leads to ineffective policies. Participatory data can provide an important solution to these hazards, ensuring that representatives of persons with disabilities are fully involved in the process of determining what data should be collected, the methods by which it should be collected, and its analysis. In doing so, participatory data can ensure that the information by which policies are designed and evaluated are answering the right questions to solve problems which they're set out to address. We at UNESCO are hoping to work with local partners like NIUA, civil society organizations, etc., to create innovative and scalable models for the systematic generation of participatory data on issues facing persons with disabilities to fill the above-mentioned gap. While working with representatives of groups of persons with disabilities, we will be preparing a contextualized methodology of participatory data collection, analysis, and use in disability inclusive policy design and planning. Leveraging the data collected, we'll be putting together 3 key outputs to support local policymakers understand and respond to these needs. Number 1, a disability inclusive city profile detailing the results and analysis from the collected data. This will serve as the basis for a series of scorecards or indicators to be developed, detailing specific issues and important pieces of information targeted at different stakeholders. A data-driven decision support system integrating insights from the participatory data and supplemented by findings collated through geospatial data will also be designed. The system will bridge the gap between the identification of needs and mobilization of existing infrastructure and services like public buildings, streets, and transport systems by leveraging unit-level data on marginalized beneficiaries living in low-income neighborhoods. This data will then be used with existing spatial data from cities to create a repository of data on public spaces, social facilities, so service delivery locations, and opportunities related to the labor market inclusion and provision of welfare services. This will be presented on an interactive online dashboard for city-level decision makers and practitioners. Number 3, efforts to sensitize and develop capacity of local stakeholders to interpret and use the data in processes of policy and design revision, aiming to strengthen the inclusiveness of policies related to persons with disabilities, including through capacity building workshops and the nomination of focal points within local authorities will be implemented. Ultimately, through this project, we hope to create an impactful and scalable model for improving the voices of persons living with disabilities within data and knowledge systems. We, along with NIUA, welcome your engagement, partnership, and collaboration. And if you have any questions related to this, you can write to me on a.sehgal@unesco.org, since I won't be here for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashwarya. I think the only thing that we can let you know is that a lot of time was investing into developing a platform that NIUA is managing, and I hope they're managing well, the NULP as well as BASIIC. So you've got some platform already ready for you to test the data. I'll now request my 5th case study panelist, which is going to be Parul. She's the country manager. She's been very patiently waiting for a turn. And thank you, Parul. She's going to speak about international experiences in mainstreaming leave no one behind in national urban policies and programs.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for giving us this platform to share some of the learnings at this important, very, very important topic today. What I want to cover over the next 5 to 6 minutes is to give you an insight. And I heard in the previous panel, well, how do you go from the legal frameworks down to the implementation? What are those different steps along the way? So through a series of case studies, I want to highlight, how different cities from the region have actually been able to accomplish in connecting those dots. For the UN and UN as a representation of the number of the various member countries have a very strong disability inclusion strategy, which we mainstream across most of our projects, and my colleagues have already spoken to that. The different mandates, that give the teeth, that give the legal impetus, starting from, and this is just an, just some key initiatives that talk about discrimination against women right from the 1979 to the UN's Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities in 2006, our own national regulations and laws, the RPwD Act that we have heard about, and then what are those forums or what are those platforms that roadmap for implementation of this on ground, which comes from the 2030 agenda that globally we are all working towards. And for UN Habitat, in the space of urbanization, we follow the new urban agenda, which was adopted in 2016 as a roadmap for localization of the interventions. Primarily, it means looking at 4 pillars: social sustainability. And we have also heard that, from the various speakers who have been part of this conclave, that it's not just about physical infrastructure. It's inclusion, transcends a lot of our realms, a lot of our experiences. So social sustainability, how do we, look at marginalized groups, talk about gender equality, look at the needs of migrants, ethnic minorities. What about economic sustainability? Creating jobs, creating livelihoods, increasing the productive and competitive capacities of the groups. Environmental sustainability, and also spatial sustainability, which is where a lot of the physical interventions, occur. And now that we have set the stage through these series of case studies, I want to demonstrate or illustrate how some cities from the region have been able to achieve this. So this is an example from Bandung in Indonesia, where a project that was implemented or funded through FCDO looked at reviewing the development of the project planning itself, something a lot of other speakers have alluded to. And Bandung, in the context of Indonesia being the 3rd largest socioeconomic contributor to the city, was one of the was in the spotlight. So the project tested this SDG project assessment tool for urban projects, and to see how specifically the public transportation projects and the systems there were being informed by the needs of by different groups. And here the focus was on informal sector workers, how to increase their livelihood capacities, incorporating the voices of women, children, youth, and persons with disabilities. The project looked at not just the infrastructure, but then also on how to create sustainable jobs and livelihoods for the informal actors that are part of the local public transportation groups. I will not go into the details of this case study. We'll share the links with you if somebody wants to do a deeper study into this. The next example that I want to share is from the same project, but looked at the application of the tool towards earthquake preparedness, the strategy for identification of risk reduction potential for the vulnerable groups. So again, same tool, but different applications in different contexts. And how do we address the needs of the disabled persons, into the consultative process as well. The next case study, we have heard about the the impact of COVID. So improving wash facilities in Lao PDR. So in the rush to provide, support infrastructure development, I think one of the important things to put in place was gender segregated bathrooms so that men and women have access to this absolutely basic need, to make sure that this is a good quality infrastructure, that it is meeting the needs of privacy, safety, and well-being of women and girls, and created a robust system for its scaling up, for expanding it across different regions. This fourth case study is on housing. I think one of the speakers also highlighted the 6 key sectors, and housing was identified as one of them. And the example here from Marawi, Philippines, and how do you engage women in decision making? So again, not just about the design, but also the participation aspect of it, where the women in the formulation of these, there was an example of self-help groups with something similar in the communities, how to make sure that there is at least a minimum representation of women in those groups so that their voices are heard, and to give them more, to empower them even more by giving the authority for procurement of resources and materials to the women, so that when there is more control over financing, more authority over decision making, that also leads to, helps in closing the gender gap. Yeah, I think, thank you. So based on these lessons that we have learned from different regions, one of the new projects that we'll be working on is how to mainstream Leave No One Behind in the national urban programs and policy. And I want to focus on the word mainstream, where the idea is not to create another set of regulations, another set of plans and proposals, but to see what we already have and how to build on that document itself, so that so that we keep on refining and improving the document to respond to the needs of a wider set of communities. So what we, it's a project that would, cover multiple countries, but essentially what we want to undertake through this project is to see how can we improve a national policy, be it a national mission, by strengthening it, by making it to the next stage, by making it more inclusive and accessible from the perspective of needs of various persons, with focus on SDG 11 and 6. And also connect the dot at the local level, where we have heard the importance of data, we have heard the importance of monitoring and verification, but then we also recognize that from the perspective of a municipal commissioner, and the demand for data from so many different stakeholders can also be overwhelming and burdensome. So the idea here is not to, to recreate a new set of indicators, a new set of demand that needs to be, met, but to see what we have and make the most of it, use technology to build on it, and we'll be happy to share more lessons from it. I want to close with this slide. So what are the key takeaways from the learnings of UN Habitat for Cities in India? One, we need to make sure that our planning policies and processes are inclusive. And by that, we have heard the word participation, participation, participation. Make sure that the nature of participation is diverse. It's open to all. We need to make sure that that we talk about accessibility and equity in infrastructure. We have already heard about data, but this final point, and I was speaking with Professor Raheja, who kind of hit the nail. He said, what about behavioral change? What about sensitization? He said, I can give you 100 different activities that you can do with that require zero investment, but all of that needs behavior change. It means the change begins with us. So I think that's also one of the the critical aspects in all our programming, through different activities of capacity building, sensitization, and also looking at being the change ourselves. So I think I'll stop there, and thank you once again.
So much, Parul. Thank you very much. I'll now request our last panelist to present the case study on embedding inclusion into the project cycle. And that's a case studies from the Cities project. And Manshi is going to do that. She works with NIUA. You know the limitation of 6 minutes. Otherwise, your own colleague is going to raise the red flag against you.
Good evening, everyone. So I'll be presenting some of the case studies from the Cities program, which will focus primarily on gender and disability inclusion. So what is the Cities program? City Investments to Innovate, Integrate and Sustain was launched in 2018 by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, the French Development Agency, European Union, and NIUA. So basically, it aims to foster sustainable, innovative, participatory approaches in selected projects, and it supplements the Smart Cities mission by supporting the special purpose vehicles in design, project development, and implementation. So it includes financial assistance of 100 million euros from AFD and a 6 million euro technical assistance grant from the European Union. The key values which the Cities projects and the program tries to imbibe include relevance and feasibility, innovation and integration, excellence in sustainable urban development, and participatory approaches. The Cities program has 3 components. Component 1 looks after 12 projects which were selected through a challenge process, and they are getting 3-tier of mentorship program from domestic experts and international mentors, and also transversal agencies. The second component includes the capacity development at state level with our state partner of Government of Orissa. And my co-panelist, Mr. Mathi, has been instrumental in supporting and leading this initiative from Government of Orissa's side. The third component includes learning dissemination through knowledge capitalization. So the 12 projects which were selected through an independent and a challenge process includes 4 thematic areas, which includes sustainable mobility, public open spaces, social and organizational innovation in low-income settlements, and urban e-governance and ICT. So even though all our 12 projects which come under the Cities program include inclusion as one of its main bases, but due to paucity of time, I will be focusing today on 2 projects, the Amritsar and the Visakhapatnam project. So the Amritsar's project is called Rejuvenation of Auto Rickshaws in Amritsar through Holistic Interventions, or as we call it, RAHI in short. So it involves replacement of 12,000 diesel autos to e-autos. It also includes a formation of Auto Rickshaw Drivers Cooperative Society, the first in the country. And very interestingly, it includes skill development for female family members of the auto rickshaw drivers. So this aspect is something which I'll be focusing more on today. And through this social mobilization, through electrification of public transport, I'll be showcasing you how this initiative, which was not earlier envisaged as a part of the project while it was submitted, through the values which the Cities program imbibes, and also the mentorship by the domestic experts and the global mentors, how this component was introduced. And it was very need-based, because during the COVID times, it was actually thought that the auto rickshaw drivers are not getting adequate revenue, and they were not plying their autos. So it becomes very relevant for their family members to actually learn some vocational training, so to compensate and also contribute to the family income. So this particular photograph which you're seeing on the screen, it shows the first consultation which took place with the female members of the auto rickshaw drivers, and how they were given an orientation last month about the project and all the different vocational trainings that can be offered to them. So this skill development courses will be provided free of cost to the female relatives of the auto rickshaw drivers, cooperative society members. And you can see Mrs. Dimple Kaur, the first lady who actually signed up for the vocational training. And within 6 months, she will be learning cutting and tailoring and will be starting her own enterprise in just 6 months. And these certificates will be provided by the All India Women's Congress, AIWC, and will be valid throughout the country. So the types of courses which are also offered include computer operator, cutting and tailoring, hair and skin care, fruit and food preservation. Now I'll be taking you down south to Visakhapatnam, where child-friendly and universally accessible infrastructure forms part of this project, which is called Social Inclusion through Modernizing Public Schools as Smart Campus. In this particular project, 40 Greater Visakhapatnam Municipal Corporation schools will be retrofitted, and it aims to rethink teaching and learning environments prevalent in government schools through the lens of inclusion and sustainability. The focus on this project would include universal accessible design through creation of ramps for access to schools, toilets, and classrooms. Not only that, this particular project also aims to equip schools with technology-based learning resources so that government schools students also learn computer literacy and are at par with the private schools. It also promotes use of BALA elements, BALA, building as learning aid, where classrooms and this entire school is used as a visual and a learning aid for the students, where a thing such as even a door can make the students learn about how the degrees of a protractor works. And it also aims to create clean and green education campuses so that all work and no play does not make Jack a dull boy. So I'll just end my presentation here. And if you want to know more about the Cities program, please feel free to contact me or visit cities.niua.org for more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Manshi. Just before we open up for the question and answers, I hope there are questions because we've got answers here. Just wanted to check men right at the behind managing the screen. Is Mr. Mathivathan still with us or he had disconnected? Oh, Pati sir is still here with us. Okay, great. So before I ask my questions, there is a great opportunity for you all to use this evening to ask questions from experts here. Are there questions here? Because we've got range of things that we saw today. We saw inclusion for third gender, which is such a great example that we've not seen before. We've seen inclusion in physical spaces here in Varanasi. We've seen inclusion in the role of data that I hope we can't answer that question now, but we've got inclusion in terms of social smartness and engineering. So I'll just wait for the audience to come up with questions. I think we've got 2 questions here. If someone can take the mic and reach first to Dipinderji and then to Mamta after that. Dipinderji, if you could tell who the question will be for.
Okay. So question basically is related to data and for the UNESCO presentation and also for the Kashi presentation. The idea here, the issue to my mind is that getting separate data on disability and accessibility features is something that could be a lost battle, because coming from the perspective of inclusive books, we know that we are trying to integrate accessibility as one of the flags in the metadata, in the whole data system of the mainstream catalogs, so that we add a flag in that, and then the search for accessibility or talking in terms of books right now. So if I have to search for an accessible book, it becomes possible for me to search that which is the book which is actually accessible. And it's not just a yes, no flag. It is also highlighting the features, some specific features that yes, this book is accessible for a blind person. This one is accessible for a hearing impaired person, and so on and so forth. Can this, or is there a thought process going on in adding such kind of flags in the GIS and the databases that we are talking about the physical infrastructures? For example, tomorrow, will I be able to search in Google Maps for an accessible ATM around me? That would be the implication of such an intervention.
Thank you, Tapindraji. I think I'll request, in the absence of the colleague from UNESCO, there is some example that Dr. Vasudevan did mention earlier as well. So if you could answer that question, sir.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question and very good thought-provoking question, because people should think of like making our websites and web portals accessible, and the GIS portals and the spatial data could be also made accessible. So if someone searches, so we could use, I think we have incorporated this feature in Varanasi GIS map, and we will extend it to the other form of search engine also. It's a good input. I'm taking it. I think we will extend it further so that it make it searchable also, and people could easily find the accessible features and facilities very easily. Thank you very much for your question and input.
Thank you, Tapindraji. I think that's a good leeway. We can take that away from this. If we go to Mamta, she had a question, and maybe after Mamta, the others are requested to have your hands ready for the questions.
Two comments and one question. One was, Manishi, why didn't you train women to be auto rickshaw drivers? That could have been also interesting, or did you? I missed that part. So if you can clarify that. The second is, talked about the vulnerable population being in the slums in the cities, but we also recognize that there are a lot of more vulnerable people who are outside the slums as well. So how do we, actually also when you're talking about city planning, we don't lose sight of that. But my main question is really both for Matiji and for you, Dr. Vasudevan. You said something very insightful, that the plan on the paper was very beautiful, but for you to actually implement it, it is really challenging. So how do we deal with some of these, very practical on-ground issues? How do we, does it make sense to do small incremental steps, or do we need to just revamp the whole street? So just trying to really figure out how do we put things into practice when we understand that it's so complex? I mean, a place like Varanasi. So those were the things. Thank you.
So maybe Dr. Vasudevan, if you could answer the first, and we'll
very
go back to
interesting
Mati
question
sir after
again.
that.
I'll tell you, we have done several very practical, pragmatic methods. When we try to make, for example, the level of the road surface and the platform the same, so that accessible person could also move easily. So it's the small distance, that is the level between the road and the platform, becomes a barrier for a disabled person. If you go and do that, what really happens is, and people in a very congested city like Varanasi, people start using their motorcycles, they park it there. The street vendors, they use it. People park half their car in the platform of outside the road. All these practical problems come. One of the methods in one of the locations which we followed is no amount of perseverance or go and talking to them did not make. So one day we did it, we took a person with a wheelchair and took to the site and told them, now he is your customer. He wants to come to your shop. How does he do it? One of the shopkeepers was creating a problem. So after seeing how a wheelchair person is struggling to reach his shop, I think that made him almost cry. He made his mind change. And it was not one person. A lot of people were witnessing what's going on here. Some smart city officials, we always proud to wear our badge. So when my team goes, there are 10, 15 people with this badge, something is happening, something happening with the smart city. So what's happening? So this kind of very, very practical solutions can be, it's difficult. You need a lot of, perseverance and follow up, because to change the people's mindset, they don't simply understand what's the problem of, differently abled person goes through. So one of the best method is to make them believe or make them sit in the wheelchair, blindfold them and go through that ordeal, and probably that will make them open their eyes. This kind of some of the out of the box solutions one may have to do in cities like that.
Right. Yeah. Maybe I think we should ask Matisar as well, because that created livelihood as well. Apart from the overcoming the barriers, created livelihood. So maybe Matisar, if you heard the question, or if you want us to repeat again, the question was how to overcome barriers and get inclusion in action.
So the question is not very clear. Is the question, does it mean that how do we design a program which when implemented in the field,
yes,
the desired result?
Yes. How do you plan to action the policy so that inclusion is demonstrated?
What we have been doing in Odisha is that whatever programs we are implementing, whether it is Jaga Mission, the slum upgradation program, that's the world's largest slum titling and upgradation program, or Vasudha 100% water supply house connection program, or 24/7 drink from tap program. All these programs are implemented on saturation basis, leaving no one behind. Entire state, all 114 cities are covered. All our program, whether it is Ahar, Mukta, no program is restricted to few cities or few population. That's one uniqueness about Odisha. Number two is that the methodology which we follow is that it's a participatory process in the planning, designing. We involve the right stakeholders, we involve the community, because most of the scheme, almost every scheme has community partnership, whether it is Mission Shakti Group or Slum Dwellers Association or the stakeholders. Their participation is part and parcel of the program, an integral part of the program. Community partnership and a decentralized approach are the DNA of our Odisha's urban governance model. So what we have been doing is that we make a pilot program and test implement in few cities, few slums, few areas, few zones. In respect of when we implemented Jaga Mission, we implemented in 50 slums in 9 cities in 2 districts. That gives a variety of field experiences, learnings. We always, and when we talk about 24/7 drink from tap, we implemented the pilot in 12 zones in Bhubaneswar and Puri, covering about 2 lakh population. So what happens, the pilot itself is a very large, so that gives variety of learnings, lots of insights we get, and we also choose the most difficult, most challenging. In fact, I must share with the participants that when we implemented the pilot in 24/7 drink from tap, we implemented that in a Basti, the slum area in Bhubaneswar. And that's the one largest slum in Odisha, Salia Sahi, having 57,500 population. One of the most difficult slum we took as a pilot. The purpose of the pilot is not to succeed. The purpose of the pilot is to get maximum learnings in the implementation, so that you will be able to fine tune the program. You will be able to visualize, foresee all these challenges that would come. Then accordingly, you design your program. Many of the assumptions in the initial stage get validated in the pilot phase. You have to do a lot of course correction, and you have to keep the program, the SOP or the template flexible. Once you succeed, then you fine tune the template and then roll it out across the state and then scale it up. That's how we have been doing all our programs.
Thank you so much. I think there were a few questions. I'd see Sangeeta stand up, and then Professor from IIT Kharagpur, and one in the back. So maybe if you could get a mic, this mic right there for Sangeeta.
Thanks, Harpreet. To begin with, I really wanted to say a big thank you to all of you. As they say, save the best for the last. Probably that's what happened here. But I also wanted to give a very special compliments and congratulations to the Odisha and Matisar. I think you demonstrate inclusion of the donors in Odisha very brilliantly. There's hardly a forum that I go to where I don't see lots of stuff that's happening in Odisha that's really being done by all of us who are there in this room. So many congratulations. I think I'm going to repeat the question that Mamta has asked Manshi, which is, how did you kind of decide that you wanted to diversify the training for the women and not really teach them how to drive the rickshaws or, what were the thinking behind it. And the other question I had was you kind of put in 3 main components of the program. It was the 12 projects, it was capacity building, and then it was learning and dissemination. Is there a connect between the capacity building and the programs? Because I saw you were doing 114 ULBs or other bits in Odisha, but the programs or the projects in those 12 are not really all in Odisha. So was there a connect, or what was the thinking behind it? Thank you.
Which 12 you are talking about, madam? Which 12?
No, so they were separate programs that Manshi had shared, which were in BASIIC, in other places, but on TA she had focused more on Odisha. So I was just wanting to understand, is there a connect between the two, or they are kind of discrete pieces of work that were happening under cities?
No, under cities in Odisha, what we are doing, whatever verticals we are already working, whatever sectors we are already working, we are onboarding NIUA and their partners to strengthen the capacity. So for the ongoing programs, we implement the urban wage employment initiative in partnership with the communities. So huge capacity building requirements are there. So we onboard them for various sectors. They have lots of partners. So that's how it's all designed to suit Odisha's requirement.
I think Manshi, sir's answer question on your behalf. If you want to add anything on it.
I'll definitely add. Am I audible? No. So, ma'am, as you actually said, these 3 components, though they are part of the program, the 12 cities component is functioning separately, and the capacity building initiative with the government of Odisha is separate. However, the team is the same, transversal expertise which is being given to government of Odisha is same as the one for the other programs of the other projects as well. So in a way, it is the entire project is interconnected. However, the capacity building initiative in Odisha is much larger, and since there's a state partner involved, so there's a special team of 3-member team of the cities NIUA, which is stationed at government of Odisha and which is supporting government of Odisha's initiatives to basically in urban development under Mathi sir's able leadership. That is one thing. And your question about the auto rickshaw drivers and skill development course. So ma'am, we actually had stakeholder consultations with the female members, and it was out of these consultations, they themselves mentioned that they want to learn vocational trainings in courses such as tailoring and hair and skin care. However, the entire thing about them learning how to drive an auto rickshaw, that was also discussed, but they were not really interested at this point of time. However, we will try to imbibe this particular component in the forthcoming program, but due to paucity of the program cycle, which will get over next year in June 2023. So perhaps in another project of like the next phase of Cities 2.0, such a thing may be introduced. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Manshi. I think there's a question here in the room. Your question, please.
Hello, I'm Professor Banerjee from IIT Kharagpur. My question is for Parulji. Thanks for highlighting the importance of data, collecting data related to disability. Now, when we talk of data, we mean probably 2 categories of data. One, when we collect, say, primary information about the vulnerable group, about their profile. And second is the secondary information data, which might be available with various organizations and institutions on available infrastructure. Now, this is really a challenge, I believe. So could you suggest any innovative approach for collating these data and also reaching out to the vulnerable group for collecting the secondary data and primary data? If you could share some experience of yours, it will be great.
Thank you for bringing this up. So we have used this
in what we call doing the safety audit, from the especially of public spaces. And I wanted to also underscore that that we have been working a lot with commissioners, municipal commissioners on ground, and from the ground level, this whole demand for data can sometimes be a bit challenging for them, to meet the demands of different stakeholders. So bearing that in mind, that we are trying to balance a very complex, sort of an ecosystem where the ability of data collection through artificial intelligence can, collect a whole lot of data, but then at the end of the day, to make sense of it, like you're saying, what do you do with it? How do you analyze it? How do you put it together? How do you make sense of it is quite difficult. And in the case of this this application of the public safety audit, one practice that we did was, again, working with the local communities, collecting different types of data. So qualitative data, quantitative data, of course, census, NSS will give a broader picture, and spatializing it. I think that is extremely critical now to be able to understand the inequalities within the cities, to just the city level parameters are no longer, as effective. But we need to see, what are the inequalities in what parts of the city, and it becomes quite challenging at that point of time to put it together without, again, working at a very local level, at the ward level, with the slum communities, with smaller districts. So I don't know if I'm able to connect the whole narrative together. So it's using the technology for collecting data. It's using the technology to be able to spatially map the data. It's using the right types of indicators to be able to pull the story together, being very clear on what the data would be used for. And then, going back to the communities, validating it, making sure that, we are getting the right message.
So do you think if we have any nodal agency who would be responsible for having all types of data related to vulnerability and vulnerable infrastructure, that would help?
Yes, so I think there are efforts by different cities. I think the Smart City Mission is now had set up these data officers, in the city, and there are examples of cities that have set up these centralized, information systems that range from being very comprehensive to still,
thank you,
to get work done. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Banerjee. Is there any other question? There's space for having 2 questions for short answers. So there's one gentleman in the last blue shirt in the last row. And then after that, the gentleman in the light blue shirt in the 7th row, maybe.
Hello, sir. This is Dr. Spur Shori from IIT Guwahati. I have a question from sir regarding transgender inclusivity. So is the sir there?
Yes, I think he can hear it. So maybe you could ask your question to Professor Mathi, sir.
I'm here.
Yeah, so sir, my first question is, have you created new job roles, specific job roles for those transgenders to include in the work field? Or have you given them a training for the regular job roles? This is the first question. And second question is, what kind of abilities have you found in them? Means putting those people into the job who are not working for a long. So was there any reluctance from them? What kind of attitude you found among them? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the answer to the first is that we have not created any new job or new job role for them. We have only met the existing demand has been met by them. We only oriented them towards, to meet our requirement. So operation and maintenance management of a water treatment plant, operation and management of a sewage treatment plant, or solid waste management processing plant. These are all set responsibilities. There is a set job chart. So only thing is that we have given special training, longer training to them, and then preparing them to do that mentally, because they were never doing a job. So we know that irrespective of their qualification, they end up taking or in prostitution. So counseling them, orienting them, giving them that comfort, confidence, that takes a longer time. That we need to work with them. We need to bring them around. That we need to have very strong leadership at the city level, very committed teams, passionate about the cause. It takes time. You have to have your involvement. So fortunately, we have good teams, team leads in the cities. So we are able to bring them around, and it inspires others. And once the job is given, once the training is given, the kind of output, the kind of productivity they give, that is amazing. Nobody else can give, because they know that it's not a job for us, for them. It's a life for them. It's a dignity for them. It's a new position, recognition. They value it much more than others. Then you will find the the results amazing.
Thank you very much. I think this would be the last question, so you get the honor to do that.
Hello, my name is Ratin Biswas, and I'm working at IIT Bombay. So my question is, the GDPR, General Data Protection regulations, are already in place, and following that, India also preparing the data protection bill, that is also in making, and a review committee has been formed, and they said that like EU region, we cannot differentiate between protecting personal data versus other data. So it's everything related. So if the data protection bill comes, how does it impact our informed decision making? What does the panel think about it? That's it.
And your question would be to whom?
Aishwarya Sehgal talked about
I'm so
data
sorry.
and governance.
Shwarya just left. I'm so apologies for this, but would it be okay if I could reach to Shwarya and answer this question? But it's actually a very pertinent question. What happens when data is available? And in an environment where we don't have data, we end up just making our own data. Data mining is called. Thank you very much to all my panelists here. Thank you to Matisa, who's been able to patiently wait and join. We come to an end of this panel. Please join me to thank all the members here who's braved the time and the air conditioner here. Thank you so much, Matisa. And thank you to Parul, Manshi. Thank you to Sriram. Thank you to Dr. Vasdev. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We thank all the panelists for such a knowledge-packed presentation, and Mr. Harpreet Singh for moderating this session so proficiently. And thank you for the audience for coming up with lots of questions. So with this, we come to the end of the day. So before we close, I would like to call upon Mr. Utsav Chaudhary, the team lead of BASIC program at NIUA, to come over on the dais to drop the curtain of the day with his closing remarks. Over to you, Utsav.
Thank you, everyone. First of all, good evening, and it's wonderful to see such bright faces at 5:30 in the evening. It has been a very long and very interesting day. We have had excellent discussions. And I think the underpinning of the day is intersections, right? Gender and disability, thoughts and ideas, policy and action. So I think as I stand here, the intersection that I am at is whether this is the easiest job of the day or is it the toughest job of the day. Easy for obvious reasons, you just have to say thank you. Toughest because oftentimes thank yous are laced with platitudes, but today I have a lot of gratitude for everyone who has made time to be here. We often feel that we are very privileged to have such excellent minds join us for such a topic that we thought we are only passionate about, but apparently it's not. And to have so many people join us is an absolute grace and an honor. So let me start off by expressing my gratitude towards all the dignitaries for their inspiring words. Madam Puri, Mr. Sharp, Mr. Mitra, and our director. Our moderators and panelists have shown poise and enthusiasm in each of the technical discussions. So thank you for that. And I would like to particularly thank Director NIUA, Sangeeta, Parul, Alka, and Kanika for launching the guidebook and the toolkit. I hope you all find some use of it at some point in time. And most of all, my sincere heartfelt gratitude to the participants without whom the day would have all been empty. Last but not the least, I would like to thank our extraordinary team that has been working at the back end. I see some fringes here and there sitting. So as I call out your name, kindly do make sure that you stand up and sort of wave your hands a little bit. In no particular order, I would like to start with Aarti from the UNRCO's office for being such a wonderful host. Kanika for working such tirelessly for the last couple of weeks. Veronica for the excellent communication work. Monica and Naveen for the excellent handling of the venue and for the logistics. Tore Loy for making timekeeping such entertaining for a change. And Abhishika for your efforts in managing the registration. Thank you so very much. And my due apologies if I have missed out in naming any one of you. Please do feel being included. As I was saying that in case, if you find yourself in a position of change, something to do for the betterment of the people who you love and the people who you want to work for, please do, and please do find yourself to be empowered enough to do so and believe in it. Thank you so very much. Have a wonderful rest of the evening, and it is wonderful having you here. Just a quick announcement.